30.
Okay, good morning colleagues and welcome to today's meeting for the Committee for the Economy, which is in public session and will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. At this stage, members, we have no apologies, so thank you all for your attendance. Are there any items that members wish to declare an interest in at this stage? If none, we'll move then to Chairperson's business. Members, the committee undertook our informal meeting with the US Chamber of Commerce on the 12th of December and with the City of Derry Airport on the 8th of January last week. The clerk has circulated short notes summarising the relevant proceedings of both on that. Are members content with that, or any issues they wish to raise? No, if not, then item 3.2 under Chair's business, credit union reform. So members of the committee will previously wrote to the department seeking clarity on its plans to reform credit unions here in Northern Ireland. Since then, a number of assembly questions, the department has advised that legislation is to be brought forward in the current mandate. Is the committee content that we ask assembly research team to provide briefing on the state of credit unions, the need for reform and the experience of other jurisdictions? Content, thank you. Draft minutes then, members. You'll receive a copy of draft minutes from our proceedings last week. Are members content that these are a true and accurate reflection of our deliberations? Agreed. Matters arising, are there any issues that members wish to raise in the minutes that aren't covered on the agenda today? Nope. Okay, then we'll move to item 6 at our substantive business, which is from the Department on the Good Jobs Employment Rights Bill. The committee will now receive a departmental briefing on feedback received to date to the recent public consultation on the Good Jobs Employment Rights Bill and refer members to page 23 of the meeting pack. At page 40 there is a further briefing from the department. At page 82 a copy of the correspondence and further documents at page 250, 253 and 258. At this stage, can I welcome our colleagues from the Department for the Economy: Colin Jack, Director of Business Employment Regulation Division; Kelly Sprott, Employment Conditions and Collective Rights; Gareth Dillon, EU Exit and Work-Life Balance; and Derbla Redmond, who is Employment Relations Policy and Legislation within the Department. Colleagues, we are delighted to welcome you here and hand over to you at this stage.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to the committee today about the Good Jobs Employment Rights consultation. The committee will be familiar with the Minister's economic mission, which contains 4 key objectives, one of which is to increase the proportion of the working age population in good jobs. The Minister wants to modernise our employment law framework in order to support the delivery of the good jobs objective. Research has demonstrated the benefits of good jobs for everyone in the economy. Good jobs can help ensure workers and their families can rely on a decent and secure income. It can also help to attract and retain people in the workforce by helping them balance their work and home commitments. Evidence has also demonstrated that good work can boost workers' productivity and health. It can further benefit businesses by ensuring a level playing field, which will ensure that good employers don't face a competitive disadvantage. So the Minister launched the Good Jobs Employment Rights consultation on the 1st of July 2024 and it invited views on a wide range of potential legislative and non-legislative interventions. There were 31 issues in the consultation document. The consultation invited views on 4 aspects of good job as defined by the Carnegie framework of good jobs. So those are terms of employment, pay and benefits, employee voice and work-life balance. The other 3 aspects are health, safety and psychosocial well-being, job design and the nature of work, and social support and cohesion. The consultation ran for 13 weeks rather than the standard 8 weeks, and that was really in recognition both of the scale of the consultation and the fact it was taking place over the summer period. So the Minister and we as officials engaged with a range of stakeholders, I suppose both prior to the formal consultation and during the consultation period, and we undertook a further series of stakeholder engagements at that stage as well, and that's been invaluable in helping the Department and the Minister gain a better understanding of the issues that are important to their stakeholders.
How was that pre-consultation consultation that you mentioned there, how was that carried out?
So we made contact initially with the engagement forum, which is convened by the Labour Relations Agency and which contains a balance of employer and employee representatives drawn from the main business organisations and the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and we had a range of engagement meetings with all those individual bodies and with the employer organisations, together with a series of meetings with ICTU as well. So that was primarily focused on those business organisations and union organisations, but we also, the document contains a number of proposals for family-related leave entitlements, and we engaged with the organisations that have particular interests in those. So, for example, some of the organisations dealing with babies in neonatal care, with carers organisations in particular. We've had quite a lot of engagement with Carers NI on the proposals on carers leave. So
that is important, but you're not defining that as pre-consultation formal pre-consultation engagement?
Well, I mean, that was, I suppose, informal engagement with organisations that are particular stakeholders prior to the formal consultation exercise. So the consultation closed on the 30th of September, and we received 192 responses. And we're continuing to analyse those responses in detail. I mean, some of them are very detailed and lengthy, and the organisations that engage have obviously put a lot of effort into them. So we need to do justice to that. So that our analysis of those and the responses themselves will help inform the Minister's decisions about the way forward and about the content of the Employment Rights Bill that he proposes that the Department will bring forward, along with any supporting programme of secondary legislation or non-legislative activities. And we're expecting that work to be completed in the next couple of months, and we'll provide a further briefing to the committee once it's complete. And the Minister's ready to take decisions. So the Department recognises the importance of the Committee's role in scrutinising legislation. I mean, this will be the start of a long period of engagement that we'll have with you, and we want to work proactively with members as they fulfil their role. And given the significance of the bill that we're proposing will be brought forward, we want to take the opportunity today to update the Committee on the progress with the consultation analysis to date, at what's still a relatively early stage in the process. We also recognise members will wish to discuss some of the consultation proposals in more detail, and we'll be very happy to take questions on the proposals themselves. It's also an opportunity, and we'd be keen to hear any views that committee members have on the proposals that were in the document in advance of any policy decisions that the Minister will be taking in respect to the content of the bill. We provided a short written summary of our interim analysis to the committee in advance of the meeting today, and that summary information provides an interim update on those topics where the analysis is advanced enough to let us provide it. We're happy to take questions on any of the issues that aren't covered in that interim update. They're just 2 or 3. And I want to stress a very important caveat that while our consultation analysis is at an advanced stage, it is still ongoing, and the summary information and statistical information within the paper that you've received will be subject to further refinement and review as our analysis work is completed. So members will be aware that responses were received from a broad range of stakeholders, from trade unions, business and employer representative groups, individual employers, private individuals, legal and HR professionals, and from the community and voluntary sector. And we do want to put on record the Department's appreciation for all those who took the time to respond. My second important caveat is that as this is an interim analysis, some of the information sets out the number of respondents who expressed a particular view on a particular topic, and the fuller analysis will incorporate further nuances which take additional account of the arguments put forward in written text provided by respondents. But we do recognise that some of the respondents, when we present those kind of percentages and numbers and so on, some of the respondents represent large numbers of people and members, and will have canvassed widely amongst their membership to help inform their response. So that's a point that I think they would make, and it's important that we make that one response doesn't necessarily equal another response, as it were. So the views expressed in these responses represent the views of a wider pool, And it should also be noted the 192 responses included a number of campaign letters from individuals and organisations expressing views on specific topics. So moving on to the interim analysis, members have received a written update on that. So I'll speak briefly about each of the 4 themes. So taking the first theme, theme A, terms of employment. This theme examined various issues relating to terms of employment. The world of work has changed significantly in recent years, and this section looked at modernising our laws to deal with precarious work, job security, and providing greater clarity about the conditions of employment. Committee members will be aware of the Minister's commitment to replace zero-hours contracts with contracts that provide flexibility and protect workers' rights, and this issue attracted a relatively large number of responses in the consultation. Respondents expressed many varied preferences and the possible policy options in this area, but a majority of respondents, including both employers and trade unions, agreed with the Minister's overarching objective of replacing zero-hours contracts with contracts that provide flexibility and protect workers' rights. As the consultation indicates, there are a variety of ways in which the negative aspects of zero-hours contracts could be addressed. The Minister will be considering a range of those options, and we'd welcome any views committee members may have on which would be most appropriate. Next, the practice known as fire and rehire has been particularly topical in recent years. This has led to a need to examine whether the existing legal framework in relation to redundancy and dismissal is sufficient. The majority of responses felt that some kind of intervention is appropriate, but there was a greater divergence of views as to what the appropriate form of action should be. The consultation also sought views on various measures which would enhance protections for agency workers and strengthen existing enforcement mechanisms available to the Employment Agency Inspectorate in the Department. There appeared to be a broad support from respondents for intervention in this area, but again, respondents highlighted specific points of consideration. So moving on then to theme B, pay and benefits. This section of the consultation sought views on actions to areas relating to improving an individual's overall pay and benefits. The consultation sought views on whether legislation should be introduced to ensure the fair and transparent allocation of tips, gratuities and service charges to workers. Consultation responses were generally in favour of action in this area. Some respondents commented on issues that should be considered or taken into account when we're determining appropriate actions on that issue. The consultation also invited views on whether to extend the reference period used to calculate holiday pay from 12 to 52 weeks in order to better reflect average pay on an annual basis, and there was general support for making that change. The Department also invited views on record-keeping requirements placed on employers to demonstrate compliance with the working time regulations that relate to hours worked. There was some divergence of views here between employers and their representative organisations who were broadly in favour of replicating legislation in Britain to clarify that it's not necessary to keep detailed records in a particular format, and those from a worker or trade union background who favoured strengthening the reporting requirements. The Department also sought views on whether the existing legislation relating to working time remains effective in terms of promoting a healthy work-life balance. A majority of respondents expressed support for a statutory code of practice. However, some respondents highlighted issues that they felt warranted further consideration should such a course of action be adopted. Moving on then to theme C, voice and representation. A full chapter of the consultation was dedicated to voice and representation, and that reflects the importance that the Minister places on it. He made clear in his initial statement on his economic mission in February that strengthening the role of trade unions was an important priority for him, and this chapter reflects that. It's the Department's view, which is supported by existing research and evidence, that when employees are involved in the decisions that affect their workplaces, those workplaces become more productive and the workforce more resilient in responding to, for example, business reorganisation or change. That in turn can see retention rates of skilled staff increase, and that stability can contribute to growth. This chapter sought views on issues which affect good workplace relationships, trade union operations and the democratic structures in workplaces more generally. In this chapter of the consultation, there is a greater divergence of views on some of the specific proposals, and many respondents offered commentary setting out the rationale for their views. The Department is currently considering this in its further analysis, which will help the Minister's decisions about the way forward. And then the final theme, theme D, on work-life balance. This chapter of the consultation sought views on ways in which the legal framework could be enhanced to promote a healthy work-life balance which allows an individual to balance their work and family life. So the consultation sought views on making it easier for workers to request flexible working from the first day of employment rather than after 6 months of employment, which is the current position. Introducing a new right to statutory leave and pay for eligible employees who have children in neonatal care. Introducing a new right to a week's leave for eligible employees who have caring responsibilities, and whether this right should be paid or unpaid. Enhancing redundancy protections for those on pregnancy or family leave, and amending existing rules on paternity leave to increase the flexibility and encourage uptake. Broadly speaking, there was support for most of these measures in principle, but there were also a variety of comments and suggestions from respondents raising points that they recommended the Department take into account. And as part of our further analysis, consideration will be given to any points raised to ensure that fully informed policy decisions can be made about these. So just turning finally to the timeline and the next steps. That was a very high-level summary of the emerging information arising from analysis. There is a bit more detail in the paper that we provided. There are 4 of the 31 topics in the consultation in which we've not been able to yet provide summary information to the committee. Those are employment status, the right to a written statement of employment particulars, the right to a pay slip, and a call for information relating to the current transfer of undertakings protection of employment legislation. The Department is also still analysing some of the more general comments that respondents made in addition to the questions in the consultation document, such as the need to consider the timing and implementation of any legislative changes in a way that recognises the capacity of employers to adapt given the volume of issues there are in the likely bill. Other respondents offered views on other priorities for employment law, and the Department is still reviewing those matters. So in making his policy decisions, the Minister is focused on good policy development which gives workers appropriate rights and protections while recognising the needs of employers and in particular small businesses. Balancing these sometimes competing interests will be a key influence as policy solutions are developed. The committee is aware, I think, that the Minister hopes to introduce the bill to the Assembly by January 2026 or earlier if there's scope to do so, and he hopes to be in a position to seek executive clearance of the policies for inclusion in the bill and agreement to the drafting by the Office of the Legislative Council within the next 2 to 3 months. That will allow the OLC to commence drafting the bill. We will, of course, update the committee throughout the process, and in particular once the departmental response document is finalised with the Minister's policy decisions. So thank you for the opportunity to update you today, and Chair, we're very happy to take any questions that members might have.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin and colleagues, for that. If I could just start, Colin, so the consultation and the responses itself, were the Department disappointed with the low level of responses to the consultation?
I wouldn't describe it as a low level of responses. I think we got responses from all the key stakeholders that we expected to, and I suppose it does have to be borne in mind that a lot of the organisations that have responded do have many sort of member organisations. So I mean, all the main business organisations responded on behalf of their members. The trade union movement responded collectively through the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, but also individual unions responded. So no, I mean, I don't think we're at all disappointed. I think we feel it's a fairly healthy response.
So of the tens of thousands of businesses out there and people that are employers, if I look at the breakdown, 66 of the responses came from an employer. Given the significant proposals within the bill, 17 areas of law will impact those businesses right across Northern Ireland if this was introduced. Would the Department not have expected a larger response from them given the impact that this may have on them?
I don't think the response is out of line with any previous consultation exercises there have been on employment rights issues. The Federation of Small Businesses certainly responded, and a range of sort of sectoral business organisations, and we would normally expect those representative bodies to respond on behalf of their members. Some of the responses that come in from individual businesses are largely to say they endorse the response from their representative body as well.
And you just mentioned the FSB, and they're one but of a number of the larger groups who, in their response to the consultation document, cited the consultation period taking place during the summer was a matter of concern for them. In the FSB's response, they note that this was during the time that a general election was being called, at a time when the July holidays here in Northern Ireland and during the summer. Similarly, the Northern Ireland Chamber highlight trying to consult with their members during the summer period. What was the rush or the rationale to try and do this consultation period during the summer?
Well, ministers on record on a number of occasions of just highlighting the short period of the mandate that remains and the challenge of getting a bill through the Assembly and achieving royal assent in the remainder of the mandate. So, we were ready to go with a consultation document, towards the end of June, beginning of July, and I suppose the announcement of the general election came when we were almost ready to proceed, and it was this is a devolved issue. The Minister had already announced his intention to go ahead with a consultation exercise over the summer, and it was important to kind of stick with the timetable in order to make sure that the committee and the Assembly will have time to scrutinise the bill in the required level of detail in the remainder of the mandate.
No, 100%. And the engagement forum that you referenced at the start of your remarks, what role does that have a formal role in this process?
Well, it's convened by the Labour Relations Agency and
under the instruction or under the auspices of the department.
Yes, so the Labour Relations Agency obviously is an arm's length body of the department, and any time that the engagement forum has been established or modified and reconstituted, that's been by the LRA in consultation with the department and in agreement with the bodies that are represented on it. That
was reconstituted for the purposes of this bill.
So it was reconstituted around the time that we were starting to engage on the bill. So in fact, the prospect of having a consultation exercise in a bill was discussed with the engagement forum at its first meeting after it was reconstituted. In fact, that was, I think, before the end of January last year. The Minister convened a meeting with that forum and invited some other organisations to come along to the meeting as well. He wanted to brief them very early in his term of office.
That engagement forum then, for this purpose or for its wider purpose following its reconstitution, is there an agreed terms of reference for that with the LRA and the members of that? I was just searching online to try and find an agreed terms of reference, and I couldn't find one.
They've been refining their terms of reference. In fact, they have a meeting tomorrow where I understand, to have a version of the terms of reference to be agreed by the forum.
There is no agreed terms of reference.
So, well, they've been working on the basis of draft terms of reference that have been refined, but there aren't major issues that I am aware of that need to be sort of changed. They've been discussing sort of textual amendments to them and so on.
Given how long it's been in place for, and we're now ended this consultation period, I would have thought that there would have been an agreed terms of reference for that group already, but you hope that might be in place in the coming days. And thank you for providing the partial analysis of the responses to date. I'm just in reading the sections. So in some sections you have included a percentage breakdown of the responses in favour of the Minister's proposals and those against the Minister's proposals, but in other stages you haven't provided that breakdown. And it makes it very difficult for the committee to interrogate properly the responses to date if you have no commonality in terms of how you're presenting those figures. So in section 3 in particular, there's no reference made in the breakdown in terms of what the views of the consultation responses are, but in other sections they aren't. And a cynic, which I am not, may say that you have provided the figures whenever they are in favour of what the minister is proposing, but when it comes to issues in which people may have differing views, you haven't provided those breakdowns. So, I know that this is an ongoing and a long process before legislation is produced, but if the committee is to properly scrutinise and to give their views on these issues, we would need to have a commonality in terms of how those breakdowns and how those figures and how that evidence is produced to the committee.
Well, I mean, obviously, as I've said, we've brought an early version of the analysis to the committee, and I mean, we'll be refining that in terms of the final response document from the department. But I think, I mean, you've mentioned that section on voice and representation in particular, and I think that's the one where some of the stakeholders would say, well, we represent hundreds of thousands of members, so if you count our response as one, and another response from an individual is counted as one, those percentage figures and so on may not, and numbers of responses may not be all that meaningful in terms of the actual, what decision should the minister take on the basis of that.
No, and I get that, and I think that's the right thing to do in terms of attributing weight to those who have responded. But you need to provide the committee with how the metric in which the minister is going to use to do that. If we're going to provide figures and breakdown for one section, we need to then know how we're weighting them on the other.
We'll certainly take that into account.
Perfect. Just to pick up then on a couple of the responses you had mentioned. So 0 hour contracts, for example, in your remarks there, you had said that the overarching responses were in line with what the minister was proposing, but you provide some further detail within the report. So there were only 30 respondents agreed that there should be a outright ban on 0 hour contracts, where 80 respondents did not agree with them. So when are we going to see then, as an outworkings of some of these responses, what the minister is actually proposing? So a lot of this, in my view, wasn't a consultation because the minister wasn't giving his proposals. It was almost a call for evidence. So he asked people what their particular views were, and it's very hard to give a response to a consultation when you're given no options to respond to. Would it have been fair that at this stage that this is more of a call for evidence rather than a consultation that was carried out?
But I think on some issues, actually, in case it was a call for evidence, I think the document was quite clear on that. Whereas there are other issues where similar changes have already been made in other jurisdictions, and I suppose the document was making more concrete proposals. But I mean, in terms of 0 hours contracts, there are a range of models set out, and the minister was keen to get views on which of those people would favour, and he is planning to sort of take that all into account and come to decisions in the next couple of months.
I'm just reading this document, for example. So day one rights. Does the minister or does the department have a list of what the day one rights are that he supports or he wants to see? Because obviously that was a call for evidence as to what people think they should be, but what's the official departmental view on this bill?
So, I mean, there are differences on day one rights and on different issues, and so, I mean, I think one of the key ones is the day one right to request flexible working, which is a significant improvement in the ability of the employee to request flexible working arrangements.
Was there an exhaustive list of what the minister is proposing?
We can certainly put a list together. We don't have that with us today. But.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, just from me, because I'm conscious that there are other colleagues, just in the paper that you have provided. Yeah, so the committee may wish to note that depending on the policy decisions made, the department may be able to progress some of the matters in the Good Jobs Employment Rights Bill in consultation by means of guidance or by secondary legislation. So could you provide a list to the committee of what the minister is proposing or considering currently to provide by ways of guidance or secondary legislation?
Yes, we can do that. I mean, Dervla, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, some of that will depend on the Minister's decisions in respect of each in the individual areas. It may be that he decides there's something that could be done by guidance. But when we look at some of the options in there would require secondary legislation rather than primary if there was a decision to do those, so we can provide further information on that. But some of it will depend on decisions made by Minister in terms of the policy.
But I mean, for example, one of the ones that we've been aware of for a long time that we could do by secondary legislation is the right to a pay slip. Not although most employees receive pay slips, there's actually currently no statutory right for them to have a pay slip. So that's one of the measures that we could potentially do by secondary legislation, and we'll certainly be looking to do that in parallel with the primary legislation that will be necessary for the bulk of the measures.
Thank you all very much indeed for that, Sinead.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your update. I know this is an early analysis and we'll probably be going into much more details and finite details around some of the sections. This is a really complex bill. It's very challenging, and given the intention, our attention in the consultation and the responses regarding the alignment with GB, I think it's a really legitimate concern for those that are responding. What steps have you taken in relation to workers' rights legislation that is coming through the UK Parliament? There is a real risk that we could catch up in our legislation only to fall behind as the UK legislation progresses as well. So how do we align and make sure that employees have the same rights as elsewhere?
It is a bit of a moving target in a sense, in that a lot of what is in the consultation document is analysis of issues where legislation has changed in GB, but employment law is a devolved issue, and so there are some existing differences, and it's fairly likely that after this process there will continue to be differences, but those will be through decisions that the Minister and the Assembly will take about that. But in terms of the Employment Rights Bill that the UK Government has published, there are a number of the issues in that bill where, in a sense, they're setting out a model of the way forward on some of the issues that we've consulted on in our consultation document. So I suppose that bill that's going through Westminster gives us the benefit of showing us a model that is one of the options that potentially could be adopted on those issues. But that's not necessarily going to be the case. The Minister isn't going to necessarily want to go with that model in every case. He's going to want to look at the needs of the Northern Ireland economy and decide what's most appropriate here.
Have you made an analysis in how we are deviating from that?
I mean, we haven't ourselves done a sort of very detailed analysis of that. I'm aware there are, for example, law firms who have done that type of analysis and have put information on their websites. I mean, there are a lot of sort of interested commentators in this area. But I mean, in the consultation document, we did attempt to set out what the position was in Britain, what the position was in the South, what the position was in other countries that were relevant. So we have examples from New Zealand, we have examples from other European countries, the Minister does want to learn from best practice wherever he can get it from on these issues. But certainly it was a point made in a number of the responses at a number of the engagement events that we were involved in, that employers and employer organisations often find it beneficial to have alignment with employment law in Britain, and certainly the Minister's heard that point. I think we will certainly be wanting to develop an employment law framework which is well understood by all the stakeholders involved.
Yeah, and I suppose just that's kind of where the business community concerns are, is you know, how are you going to articulate to the business community, because some of the responses are saying that this bill risks imposing considerable compliance burdens on them. So how are you going to kind of mitigate and communicate with the business community to reassure them that that is not the intention of the bill itself?
Well, certainly, I mean, we had the formal consultation process, we have the engagement forum, we have regular contacts with all the main business organisations, and the engagement forum, I mean, part of the reason why they're taking time to refine their terms of reference is we see them very much as having an ongoing role and being, I suppose, our key sounding board on employment relations issues in particular, but potentially other wider issues in the economy. And so,
such as what?
Well, I suppose anything related to the world of work. You know, for example, they put out a statement in the summer in response to the rioting that took place and so on. So they're interested in any issue of employment relations, even if it's one that's not specifically in DFE's remit, because those issues around, you know, racism and so on, the policy responsibility would rest elsewhere. So, you know, but I mean, you know, it's really for those employer and business and employee organisations to decide to some extent what they want to use the engagement forum for as well.
I just think in advance of a terms of reference being agreed, we can't say that they speak on particular issues or they speak on behalf of organisations. If there's no terms of reference and stakeholders haven't signed up to that, it would be slightly inappropriate to say that they can determine other matters of policy in Northern Ireland if that is either outside the departmental remit or outside the remit of terms of reference that they've agreed to.
Yeah, so I mean they're an engagement forum, so you know they're a stakeholder that will feed in views in that format, and it's about providing a forum for discussion between employer and employee organisations and giving feedback to us. But there are lots of other ways in which we get that dialogue with the business community. The Minister meets business organisations very regularly, and you know we have an open door to them. So,
sorry, she need apologies.
Yeah. So.
I suppose we're taking evidence this afternoon or later on this morning from the Northern Ireland Chamber, and we will probably as a committee continue to do that wider engagement as well, so that we can scrutinise properly the content of the bill. Just on data, can I ask about data again? The NISRA data suggests that 67% of jobs in Northern Ireland are good jobs. But it has a really narrow understanding of what a good job involves, and we've done a lot of belly button gazing ourselves in this committee in relation to what is a good job. But do you have any plans to consider the proportion of jobs that could be considered good jobs within a wider definition?
Well, the definition that the Minister has endorsed is the Carnegie Framework definition, which has the 7 elements, and the issues in the consultation covered 4 of those. And I think you will see, as we move, and obviously those 7 dimensions of a good job go beyond what's covered specifically by the employment law framework. But I think there's a very clear agreement on that Carnegie Framework, and I think it has a broader currency in other jurisdictions as well that are looking at what is a good job. So the analysis, I mean, NISRA certainly has developed its analysis of work quality indicators in a way that is aligned with the Carnegie Framework. So we should have a sort of series of data over time that does allow that kind of comparison of, you know, what proportion of the population are in good jobs to be monitored as we move forward.
So when would we be expecting that data? Because that is really quite important for this bill.
Well, we probably need to ask NISRA for that, but I know that they publish some of that data annually. They publish an annual update, as I understand it, to the work quality indicators.
Okay, and again, that data from NISRA is indicating that there's a real gender differential between the proportion of women in good jobs, and I suppose yesterday we've had a debate in the Assembly in relation to all of that in terms of gender budgeting. Does the department have any plans or any space which will explicitly include a focus on gender in relation to good jobs?
Well, there has been some the issue of gender equality specifically, and the legislation on that is a responsibility of the Department for Communities. In not the last mandate actually, but when we brought through the 2016 Employment Act, there were some provisions added into that Act dealing with gender pay gap reporting, and my understanding is that the Department for Communities is looking to refine that and bring gender pay gap reporting into operation. And there has been some correspondence at ministerial level on that issue, and what proposals can be brought forward on that. So certainly I think gender pay gap reporting is something that we can expect to be introduced and come into operation here. But there are a whole range of factors that affect the gender pay gap, and some of the issues in our consultation exercise, particularly on the family related types of leave, should help to close the gender pay gap. It might be difficult to draw, make absolute sort of pronouncements about how much contribution they have made, but the right to request flexible working from day one and make it a more frequent right is certainly something that ought to increase the ability of women to work in a way that is flexible, and men, and meets the requirements of their families. Carers leave is also something that should have a positive impact on gender participation in the workforce. So certainly that's something that we see this bill is contributing to.
Yeah, and I think it's fundamental. I know that it is one of the responsibilities of the Department for Communities, but if we're looking at a good jobs bill, it's fundamental to it as well, and there should be a move to ensure that it's gender responsive.
Yeah. Okay,
other things to ask, but there's so many questions. It's such a big bill, but I'll pass it over now.
Hello.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So, obviously, it'll be no surprise to hear that. I welcome the bill. I welcome the policy intention contained within the bill to improve and protect the rights of workers, particularly on the issues that have been outlined on things like zero-hour contracts, fire and rehire practices, and also with regard to collective bargaining. So from that point of view, I see the bill having lots of good potential, and also I suppose from an economy point of view, we're obviously well aware in terms of our economy, some of the key problems of productivity and getting the economic inactive back into work. So I see certainly potential within this bill with regard to maybe helping to solve some of those problems as well. The department did say in this document that this is a preliminary analysis and not a deep dive. So I'm sure we're going to have plenty of engagement as we go forward. So there was a bit of a to and fro between the chair and yourself with regard to the consultation, and just further to some of those questions. I'm wondering if you have any analysis at this stage of what particular sectors respond. I know you talked about organisations in terms of trade unions and business organisations, but is there any analysis of particular sectors that responded to the consultation, and maybe sectors that haven't responded?
We do have an analysis of the sectors, or at least the types of respondee. So we had 66 employer respondents, 25 representing an industry employer association, 19 representing a trade union, 23 representing a charitable or voluntary organisation, 45 individuals, and 13 other responses. Not quite sure what those
public
are.
Sector bodies.
Public could be partly, and then there's one who's not known. So so we do have that, the breakdown at that level. I'm sure we could break it down in more detail if if there were particular aspects of who's responded you were interested in?
I'm thinking in particular, was it the hospitality and tourism sector? Was it manufacturing sector? If you can, education. If there was some analysis, a bit deeper than that, I think that might be useful. And secondly, obviously the trade unions are key in this, and there's engagement with the trade unions, and there's been responses from the trade unions. But beyond that, maybe even into the private sector, what type of engagement, if any, was there with like employees or trying to gain the views of employees maybe further within the private sector that maybe currently don't have trade union representation?
So, taking the first aspect, you mentioned hospitality and manufacturing specifically. So, we met with both Hospitality Ulster and Manufacturing NI as part of the preliminary engagement before we had run the consultation exercise, and I think both those organisations responded. In terms of individual employees, that's quite tricky. Most of our engagement has been with the union sector, but we did meet people who were 0 hours contract workers in one particular organisation. The Minister has also made clear while the formal consultation is finished, the consultation and engagement is an ongoing process. We are due to meet some people who work on some of the app-based work platforms in the gig economy. We'll want to hear directly from them about their experiences. So, we are seeking to get views from individuals. We do have some, obviously, individual responses that are from employees. And we could probably break that down in terms of whether the individuals are responding in their capacity as an employee or really some other capacity. But some of those will be from individuals who are carers, for example, specifically. So.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly from me, it's going to be a big piece of legislation, and you said that the Minister intends to bring it before the Assembly at the beginning of 2016. How long do you think that process from introduction to completion will last, and is there plenty of time within the mandate to get it through?
Okay, well, we were just discussing this before we came in. I think there's one member of the committee who's still here from the last mandate, and we went through the process of taking through the parental bereavement leave and pay bill. But our expectation is that that process would take probably a good part of the 2026 calendar year by the time we have all the different stages, the committee stage. To some extent we're in the committee's hands because the committee has discretion about how long that committee stage takes, but we've made certain assumptions about that in our own working timetable, but
assumptions have you made for how long the committee stage will be?
Dervla, you have a...
Yeah, so sorry, isn't it, there's a statutory minimum, and then there's the ability to extend that, and for a bill of this size, our working assumption is that perhaps the committee might want to take a little bit longer than the minimum time frame to look at that.
What's your working assumption that you have put together?
Our working assumption is that the committee will want to take 3 months. And if that's the case, we should be on track to get the bill through in the current mandate. Okay, so we've been fairly, we've assumed the committee will want to scrutinise this bill in detail. So,
Philip, do you have anything else, sir?
No, I'm not sure about 2016 or 2026 in terms of bringing the legislation, but so if I said 2016, that was obviously wishful thinking. So that's me.
26 it is.
We're going backward, Philip.
Okay, Vice Chairman.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Colin, for that update. Obviously, it is a significant piece of work. and we've heard in terms of, and we've read your piece in terms of the consultation. I have to say I do share the Chair's view in relation to what I would see as a bit of a disappointing response to the consultation, given the wide-ranging impact that this would have across Northern Ireland. So I suppose I pose the question in terms of the confidence that you have as a department in terms of whether the 13-week consultation across the summer period does justice to some of the significant issues that are contained within the proposals.
I mean, the normal period for a consultation process is 8 weeks, and the Ministry extended that to 13 weeks. Consultation exercises often take place over the summer. It seems, and I mean, I suppose we were in the position where devolution was restored in February, and we were asked to work intensively on getting a consultation document out. I suppose if we look at our counterparts in Britain, where the new government had a deadline of introducing a bill within the first 90 days, it's whenever new administrations come into operation, they want to make changes quickly and they want to engage with people in doing that. And we've had a lot of very good engagement with business organisations, with unions. As I said, we felt the response was fairly healthy. And certainly there's a very high quality in the responses that we've received.
Yeah, and I sought to demean those who have responded, because thankfully there are responses in, obviously the Chamber, the Northern Ireland Chamber is one of those. Is there a risk, and certainly from reading some of those responses, that this good jobs bill actually could result in less jobs? We think of the 0-hour contract issue. And we hear clearly from in some of the reports, Mount Charles, for example, Titanic Belfast, the hospitality and tourism sector have deep concerns about what this will mean. Effectively, actually, it will mean less jobs, because they will not be able to employ these people on that type of basis. So, what is your consideration in terms of that? But also, we don't have enough data in terms of the wider impact across Northern Ireland. Does the department hold data as to what it would mean if a ban on 0-hour contracts was to come forward, what that would mean for the wider society of Northern Ireland?
The Minister was very clear in his initial statement and throughout the document that his plan was to replace 0 hours contracts with contracts that better balance the needs of businesses and employees. And certainly, we have received a lot of responses from business organisations about people who are on flexible working arrangements and work on a sort of on-call basis and so on. So, I mean, the Minister will very much want to listen to the views that are in the responses in formulating his proposals in terms of what does a replacement of 0 hours contracts look like. I mean, that proposition of replacing them was well supported by both employer and employee organisations.
And how confident are you? I've seen a piece from FSB in the media today around concerns that many employers actually may not be aware of this piece of work that's ongoing. So, as I say, it goes back to the point around data. There will be employers out there who may not be aware of such a significant proposal being brought forward. So what are you doing, certainly what is the department doing to get that data and to make those businesses aware of what could potentially be coming down the line?
Well, I mean, we did put quite a lot of effort into publicising the consultation. There was media coverage. There's been a lot of social media. We've engaged a lot with the business organisations, and quite a number of them organised events for their members where it was discussed. There has been a lot of engagement where individual employers should have been made aware, and well, clearly were aware because they attended. I mean, I suppose the nature of small businesses, they're harder to reach with those kind of messages. So, it's going to be a process that will take now another sort of 18 months or more to sort of bring the bill through. So there'll be plenty of further opportunity to raise awareness in the small business
For
sector.
those small businesses are effectively the backbone of the economy, and what we don't want to do, as I say, is create a situation where this Good Jobs Bill turns out actually to be a burden and create further bureaucracy for many of those businesses who are struggling. Just a final point, because there's a lot of areas covered. As a committee, it's going to be a huge piece of work interrogating the potential of what this could mean. There's a lot of good things there. There's also things of concern. You'd indicated it's still the Minister's intention to bring the bill to the House in January 2026. So in that period, obviously, there's the work of the committee. But do you intend, is there an opportunity for further, given the fact that there's a lot of things in there, it's just a call for evidence, there weren't many proposals specifically from the department as to what the Minister would like to see. Is there an opportunity then for further consultation with the sectors involved? We talk about specifics because obviously there's the guidance piece, which hopefully we'll get an answer to as to what potentially could come in guidance. But when it comes to legislation, is there potential that those could be separated and further consultation?
Well, there'll certainly be ongoing engagement with the business organisations, with the unions and with the special interest organisations that are interested in some of the family leave type issues. If there was anything new that we haven't consulted on, then there is a possibility we might need to have further formal consultation exercises, but we've no specific further consultations planned at the moment.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Diana.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel, for coming to us today. I represent the area of Fermanagh South Tyrone and in a previous life Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, and that's an area where 94% of businesses are micro businesses with a turnover less than 50,000. So it's and a lot of those businesses in many cases have no affiliation with a trade organisation or body. So I do have a concern that you haven't reached them in that consultation process and their voices are not being heard. It is imperative we have a good jobs bill and that it is one that increases output, productivity, protects jobs and gives people the right working environment to work in. But in the case where you've got small family businesses, in the case where you have embryonic businesses, how are you going to mitigate against, as Sinead said, making it onerously compliant, or that the compliance is onerously heavy on those small businesses? That's one question I have. And the other question is, did you engage with local economic partnerships in the consultation process? Because the local councils are most in touch with their work for what is happening economically in their district, and I feel that would be very important. I share members' points of view that it seemed to go out at a time when perhaps people's attention were on other things, and there's a lot in this bill that has to be implemented, and it's just that burden on those small businesses, that 94% with under 50,000 turnover, and how that affects them.
I might bring in Kelly just specifically on some of the sort of issues around voice and representation, where there are differences, I suppose, in terms of what small businesses are required to do by comparison with larger businesses. But we certainly engaged with a number of umbrella organisations that have many small businesses in their membership. So, for example, Retail NI, Hospitality Ulster, Manufacturing NI. So, they were very much bringing the views of their members, some of whom were quite small businesses, to us. But no, we haven't engaged specifically with the local enterprise partnerships that you mentioned. But Kelly, do you want to add a little bit just about, for example, the union issue?
Yeah, no, I mean, you raise a very good point. We're very cognizant of the fact of the number of small and micro businesses in the economy, and it's something that the Minister is very cognizant of too. So whenever we're looking at this in the whole, we'll be taking into account the impact that this might have on the very businesses that you're talking about. With regard to certainly the voice and recognition part, it's something that we have been very cognizant of, and there are certain exemptions in legislation as it stands at the moment for micro businesses, and certainly it's something that we are considering whether they should remain or not. So it's a very live issue for us, and that's with regard to certain sort of engagement with your employees, a requirement for collective bargaining, all those kind of issues. That is something that is at the forefront of our mind. What I would say as well, for the very small businesses you're talking about, the issues on the work-life balance part of the consultation, whenever there is a statutory payment brought in for a right to a family-related leave, those businesses would receive 103% back from HMRC, so it wouldn't be at a cost to them. If it's a statutory payment, they would receive that back.
You understand it's not at a cost to them financially, but it's replacing the person who's absent, so it's in the workflow and their work process. And the other question I wanted, and obviously it's an agricultural area I represent. Did you consult with Ulster Farmers Union the impact on some of the farming community?
We didn't specifically engage with the Ulster Farmers Union. I'm not sure if they responded. Did they?
I can't remember. Sorry.
Right.
Who represents the agriculture sector on the engagement forum?
I mean, the organisations that are on the engagement forum are the CBI, the Northern Ireland Chamber, the FSB, Federation of Small Businesses. We have Manufacturing NI. I mean, one of the issues is that the agricultural sector has a separate set of arrangements through the Agricultural Wages Board, and there's there are the Ulster Farmers Union and Unite are involved in that. So I suppose issues around agricultural terms and conditions are slightly separate from the ones in the rest of the economy, but certainly the general business organisations, I suppose, would represent the agri-food sector at the engagement forum.
Going back to manufacturing and those larger organisations, I know from those smaller businesses in the area that I represent, they aren't part of those bodies. So I do think there's an important piece there about reaching those micro businesses. Thank you very much.
I mean, I suppose just one thing I would say as well about small businesses is that we've other strands of work that we're doing with Federation of Small Businesses. So there's something called the Small and Medium Business Impact Test, and we have one in the consultation document that we did on good jobs, but we're doing work to promote awareness of that and adoption, and departments following that when they're making policy proposals. We also have work on whether small businesses are being paid promptly by larger companies that they supply and so on, and we're working with the Small Business Commissioner and the Federation of Small Businesses to sort of raise awareness of that issue and make sure that performance improves on that across the economy.
Thank you very much indeed. Padraig?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for their answers so far. I find the questions really interesting so far as well. Obviously, like Philip, I'm very much in favour. I see huge benefits in this bill. I think that it's really important for employers, but that it also augments the rights of employees as well. And I note particularly in terms of getting access to employment and sustaining that employment. It's very important. One element which has been mentioned is which was previously a private member's bill brought forward by my colleague Martina Anderson, and that's around carers and improving their rights within the workplace. So I think that's really important. I'm really, really happy to see that moving forward at pace. My question, you've already touched on other jurisdictions, but primarily you've touched on the UK. So I suppose for me in Derry and in many border constituencies, we have a huge number of cross-border workers. And I'm very conscious of the fact that when we look at other jurisdictions, quite often we gravitate towards Westminster automatically. I'm keen to understand what engagement you've had with the South and with other jurisdictions in terms of best practice and in terms of actually aligning, particularly for border constituencies, workers' rights.
So we do engage on a very regular basis with our counterparts both in Britain and in the South. We've met with the team that sort of are our counterparts in the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in Dublin. And that has opened up a range of sort of ongoing contact with them on all the issues. And I mean, you'll see in the document that we've tried to, in most cases, set out, well, what's the position in Britain, what's the position in the South, what's the position anywhere else that is relevant to the particular issue that we're looking at. And obviously the Minister will want to take account of those issues as he takes decisions.
Yeah, thanks for that. And specifically, have you had any engagement on any areas which you have seen, I suppose, that weren't aligned, that you think there's potential to align with the South?
I mean, certainly the model that they have for for banded hours contracts to replace 0 hours contracts is something that we've looked at in some detail, and we've outlined that in the consultation document, and I suppose to some extent that will provide us with a benchmark as we move forward. But we've engaged on other issues, for example, carers leave. There's a particular way they organise that. We've discussed that with them. We have also, there's a separate, we're coming to the committee again in 2 or 3 weeks' time on domestic abuse safe leave. Safe leave has been introduced in the South. We were in a position to sort of hear a bit about the experience of how it's been working in practice there, although I think our legislation actually went through the Assembly before the legislation in the South, so certainly it's an active sort of engagement and dialogue that we have with them. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add anything to that.
Just it is part of our routine horizon scan and our policy engagement to reach out to our counterparts in the South and in Westminster.
That's great. And I suppose specifically on the 2 elements that you've asked, can you provide a wee bit more detail on what that might look like in practice? Just to ensure that there is an all-Ireland approach to the work. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you very much, and we're going to be seeing a lot of you over the next year. So many. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Patrick. Apologies.
Right. No, it was just to get a response to that.
Oh, you were wanting an answer on those specific, on the banded hours and the safe leave.
So it was a specific idea of what you're doing on an all-Ireland approach to ensure that going forward we can actually work collectively on them, and what changes you see to our legislation to line up.
I suppose we haven't, it'll be for the Minister to make those decisions about what he determines as a consequence of the consultation. So that's sort of the next stage we're at in the process, but it is just that we continue to liaise with our counterparts in terms of developments, how things are going, what specific proposals they introduce.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose, we also know the Minister engages regularly, and we engage regularly with, for example, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, which operates in both jurisdictions, and we have a dialogue with them as well. And the ministers in the South, make their own decisions on employment law issues as well. So, sometimes our minister will agree with those, sometimes he may not. So, it's really on a sort of, it's making sure though that there are arrangements in place which don't act as an impediment to people who are maybe in the situation you mentioned, which is people living in one jurisdiction, working in the other, and so on. And I mean, there's a lot of work going on elsewhere to try and address that, and we'll certainly link in with that.
I appreciate that, but I just still need clarity just around what specific proposals that you've identified in those 2 areas that you're going to bring forward to the Minister for consideration.
You mean in respect of 0 hours contracts?
So the banded hours and the safe leave that you've mentioned, just what specific elements are you going to bring forward for consideration?
I suppose for 0 hours contracts, I mean, the consultation set out, I think it sort of invited views on 7 broad options, one of which was banded hours. So obviously we'll take those options and we'll look at, the consultation responses, and that'll form part of the Minister's decision making. It's one of the options on the table.
Yeah, and I mean, we've had further engagement with an academic in the South, for example, who is an expert on how the banded hours arrangement has worked in practice, and we've heard some views from her on that. So we'll be taking those into account in terms of advice to the Minister, and I'm sure he'll want to take that into account as he takes decisions.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Kate.
Okay, thank you. It's massive. It's a massive bill, and some colleagues have mentioned this already, but I just want to reiterate. My party responded to the consultation, and it was a really difficult consultation to respond to because there weren't clear proposals within it. And I had also written to the Minister about extending the consultation response, having engaged with business sector and trade unions as well, actually. Just about the short time of the consultation. I think that is justifiable if there were concrete proposals within it, but it just, I suppose what I really want to say is that in response to Gary's point about further consultation, you yourself said actually parts of this are a call for evidence, not necessarily a consultation. So a consultation would be merited where there were things that were new. In fact, a lot of this is going to be new because you haven't actually set out what the department's position is. So for me, there's a lot that is interesting, and I think we're going to have great discussions about it. I'm not actually entirely sure what is going to be in this bill. And I think that's problematic, and I'm worried about consultation in relation to that. So I guess my first question is, there were 4 areas where there was no commentary. Just off the back of Podrick's question there around 0 hours, you're looking at 7 different areas, and it's going to be based off the consultation. When are we actually going to see the detail of what the Minister is actually proposing, so that we can actually consult properly on it?
Yeah, so I mean, the Minister's proposing to bring forward a response document following the consultation that will set out, both what the responses were, the summary of the responses, but he will also set out his decisions on the way forward. But before
when
so that should be in the springtime, so that shouldn't be too far away now.
It's interesting. It's interesting knowing what people have responded to saying that. That's something we'll be looking at. What we really want to know is what the Minister is planning to do.
Yeah, and I mean, so he will take his policy decisions. Then the Office of Legislative Counsel will draft the bill. Subject to executive approval. That is absolutely important. Then subject to the executive agreement, the bill, it would be introduced to the Assembly, and then the committee, I would expect, will probably want to hear evidence from stakeholders itself at that stage on the different issues. So that certainly would reflect the model of bills I've been involved in the past.
Okay. And there was mention of the committee stage. I'm hoping it's not going to be as long as DOJ, which their current legislation, I think it's finishing Easter next year. The voice and representation. The voice of the worker is so important, and my party really welcomes any move towards transparency and accountability and protections of whistleblowers in particular. But the lack of detail there was something that we had an issue with, and implementation costs. And I know from speaking to the business sector, there are real questions about how that's going to look. How much detail can you go into about these things of what the Minister is likely to decide?
Well, I suppose that, our role today is to give information about what we received back in consultation, and I suppose we wouldn't want to steal the Minister's thunder. Okay.
A lot of my questions were in that line, so I'll not go into any of those. The right to disconnect. In Australia, that only applies to small business employees. In the South, I think they have a code of practice. It's just an interesting concept for me, how it actually works. What do you envisage that looking like?
Well, at the moment, obviously we don't know what Minister's decision will be, but it is actually one of the areas where there is sort of uniformity of ideas of approach between GB, ROI and ourselves. You're right, in the ROI they have that code of practice, and I think there's 3 elements of that have to be met, and GB are consulting on it at the moment, same as we are, with the view, speaking to my GB colleagues, of actually following the ROI line. Certainly our analysis has come back to show that there's broad support for a need for some form of clarity in law, given the changes in the workplace with technology and COVID, to say what should be done or shouldn't be done with regard to right to disconnect. So we'll take on board all of that, and then Minister will make his decision. But it's one of the areas where there could be consistency.
Okay. I think that as Sinead had mentioned as well about kind of alignment with GB, and it's really interesting, the legislation that's coming from Westminster, and good that you're doing horizon scanning. We've been in the lead before in the past when it comes to employment law, and very much hope that we'll continue to do that. But I think having regular updates as well from yourselves as you're doing that horizon scanning to the committee will be useful, just to know changes that are happening. The final point I wanted to make, because I never miss the opportunity to talk about paid carers leave, and welcome the fact that you've mentioned it several times actually in your answers and the engagement. The Minister responded to a question to me saying that there is independent research being done by Ulster University. Will this include costings and a proper cost benefit analysis? Or what will this research actually contain?
Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so there's a meeting this afternoon between UUPC and ourselves and Carers and I as well, just to let you know. So that's an ongoing process. We anticipate that this will come back hopefully this side of Easter. That's the sort of timescale that we're looking at. It's going to be a broad review of current available literature, so the methodology used in the consultation, some of the methodology used through Carers and I and WPI, and we're hopeful that there will be an element of cost-benefit analysis. This is going to be an ongoing iterative process, so we'll hopefully know more following our discussions this afternoon as to where we're going and in terms of the timescales and what's going to be included in that.
Okay.
I suppose something that's important for the committee to understand in relation to any of these paid leave entitlements, where they are put in place in Britain, we get, well, whether there's a Barnett consequential, but it comes at, if Northern Ireland does the same thing, it can be done at no cost, no additional cost. But where we do something that goes beyond what's available in Britain, then there's, an expectation that the executive will pay for it. And some, I suppose, forms of leave, the cost is much clearer than others. We receive information every year from HMRC about the cost of, for example, paternity leave in Northern Ireland, and in the current model, which is 2 weeks entitlement, it costs somewhere in the region of £2.5 to £3 million per year. Increasing that, for example, which is an option that is set out in the consultation document, we could probably have a reasonable degree of confidence that we could project what that might cost. The executive should, the Minister and Executive and the Assembly, decide that was something we wanted to do. Obviously, that's in the context of a budget that's pretty constrained at the moment, so the executive could potentially have a lot of difficult decisions to take. You mentioned the costings for carers leave, and there's quite a lot of, I think it would be fair to say there's been quite a lot of variance in terms of the estimates of what that might cost.
In your response to my question, I think it was based on 100% uptake in carers, and research would say actually it's a lot less than that, and most people would only take 3 days. So I think the research is really welcome, and you've got to have the cost but the benefit analysis as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for the report. And this is not a criticism of you, but it just isn't very satisfying knowing kind of what's going to be in the bill yet, and knowing actually what we're going to be scrutinising. So it will be really great when you do come back and when the Minister has taken a decision on how we'll progress.
David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again. Welcome the kind of broader reach of what we're trying to do and trying to protect workers. But can I just, a lot of stuff's been covered. Two areas I just want to look at. One is the public sector. So how are the public, so that you've got a lot of our economy is employers in small business and business, but a lot of our economy is also people employed in the public sector. So how are they being consulted?
Well, they're aware of this, and I mean, the Minister would have written to all his executive colleagues, but we've been in contact with people in the various departments with large public sector workforces to alert them to the fact that the consultation was happening. We've met some of them, and I mean, they take account of proposals that are in documents like this in their planning for the future. I suppose it's fair to say a lot of employment rights where the legislation is setting out the legal minimum, most public sector organisations would already go well beyond that in terms of the terms and conditions of the staff. A lot of the drive in employment legislation is to bring, I suppose, workers and employees in the economy who are perhaps on less good employment conditions closer to the conditions that better employers and public sector often are at the higher end in terms of the employment rights that are offered. So, in terms of cost and so on, the cost to the public sector shouldn't be that great where they already comply with any requirements that are being introduced.
So if you've got an arm's length body that from the government that's funded from here, effectively, you're content and happy that they've been consulted and their views have been heard within the consultation?
Did we get many responses from arm's length bodies?
Well,
we certainly got responses from the Equality Commission and some of the key ones with policy interests and all of this, but certainly that they would have been informed of the consultation and would have had the opportunity to respond.
Okay.
Yeah, they would have been on the consultation sort of distribution list, so that they had the opportunity.
Okay, look at just at one area that if interests themselves, the self-employed status within this. Or within the wider bill, and we need to address the bogus self-employed, and I'm not in any way saying so. I agree kind of broadly in principle with what's trying to be achieved there and stop the exploitation of people. But when the consultation went out, there was absolutely no offering of what was going to happen or what was the ministers or so you're not consulting anything. You're just throwing an idea out in the wind and looking for responses to nothing. So how is that a consultation?
Well, I mean, the document set out a range of options, and the responses that have come back, have many of them have said, well, this would be the option that we think you should follow. So,
okay.
I suppose just on the status one in particular, I think there was a recognition that that's particularly complicated. And it's that sort of core employment right across. It dictates what your status does, dictates what rights and responsibilities the employer and the worker has. And because it's so complex and because there's that interaction with the tax system, that particular section of the consultation was really aimed at trying to better understand the issue, to understand what the issues are, and that was really to take account of that and to better understand what's going on.
And that's my point. It's not a consultation. It's a throw it out into the wind to try and find out what's happening. But you're using that as a consultation to then bring something forward.
Well, I mean,
I don't get that.
And I mean that is probably of all the issues in the consultation, it's one of the trickiest, because there is an interaction between employment rights and the tax system. So,
what consultations happened with HMRC?
Well, we do liaise regularly through our colleagues in the Department of Business and Trade initially, you know, in terms of that. That's the first point of contact for us.
Can our committee have that consultation back from what has happened? Because so employment law sits here, that's fine, but tax law sits in London and in the UK Parliament. So if you're going to alter one affects the other. So if you're going to consult on one, then there needs to be a consultation with the other, and we need as a committee to see what that response back was, because you can't scrutinise this without knowing what the consequences is on the other side.
Look, part of our work on this issue is also our liaison, Derf has referred to it, with the Department for Business and Trade, and the UK government has mentioned that it intends to look at this issue, you know, as part of its making work pay sort of consultation beyond the employment rights bill that you know is currently in Westminster. So, you know, I suppose they've set out that, you know, when they're looking at this issue in relation to Britain, that's going to take a bit of time. So, you know, it may be, you know, we still have to finalise our analysis of the responses in this and discuss it further with the Minister. So, you know, this is really one of the ones where it's probably most complex.
It is, and it affects probably a massive part of our small micro businesses who and there's and again I agree with the part. You've had the Uber cases before, we've had this stuff, so I'm agreeing with the principle of what we're trying to achieve, but what we could end up doing is the unintended consequences of creating another sector where people have to actually end up with less rather than more, and actually less protection rather than more protection, and businesses that are subcontracting now end up worse off. So in the real world, this could end up being actually detrimental to our economy. So that's a bit. But my fear is this isn't a consultation on this area. So how can we bring forward a bill if there's actually been no consultation on specifically on this piece?
I mean, I mentioned, you know, we have a plan to meet with some platform workers, for example, that you know, got in touch with the department. But I think that's one of the trickiest aspects as well, actually hearing what the individuals' experiences are that are working in these types of working arrangement. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I think the Minister's made clear the kind of, although the formal consultation is finished, the kind of need to consult hasn't finished, and it will be done on an ongoing basis.
Okay,
in
so
terms of our ability
that's really important. So there will be further consultation as proposals come forward.
There's certainly, you know, we'll want to make sure that any proposals that come forward are tested with all the people that will need to work with them.
Whenever a specific decision is made of what area this is going to be, will that be consulted to the FSB, Northern Ireland Chamber, and all the other the trade unions, everybody?
Yeah, I mean, all of this, we're in an ongoing dialogue with all of those organisations.
I don't want dialogue. I'm asking, will there be a consultation?
Specific? I mean, dialogue involves discussion of specific issues.
Okay. No.
Yeah, but we could say that this is consultation because we're discussing. Having ongoing engagement is something that I may say to someone who, yes, I will listen to what you have to say, but it doesn't particularly mean that I'm going to take what you have to say on board. So I think the point is, will there be a formal consultation by the department on their proposals that have not been covered within the document that was published during the summer period? I mean, I think what David is asking. I mean, it's either yes or no, or you can't answer that to ministerial.
It's for minister to decide. At this stage, it's difficult.
So you can't give any guarantee to the committee. Fair enough. Anything else, sir?
No, I'm good.
No problem. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Colin and others, for your presentation. I suppose, as has been mentioned by all committee members, it's a huge area, and for me, that in itself gives cause for concern, because I suppose probably, as Kate has maybe outlined, you know, some of the details we're still not really clear on what that will be, and the buzzword for me in all of this is potential unintended consequences of certain aspects of law. Like 17 areas is a massive period, and it's already been covered about some of the consultation, and how adequate that's been. I think I would be concerned not just with this committee, but others, as to how we go about consultations, and is it a true and accurate reflection of what the wider picture is. I think also it's important to put in context that, by and large, Northern Ireland does not have poor employment rights when we compare it globally around the world, particularly with larger economies than ours. Our citizens enjoy very good rights under employment, and we have some of very significant employers, both from a larger scale, but also significantly to our economy and a smaller business perspective, that go above and beyond to try to help their employees. They're flexible where they can be to ensure that their business delivers for them. I just want to cover a point with you, Colin. So obviously 17 areas. Are we going to see individual impact assessments for every particular area, given the scale of this and the potential for unintended consequences?
So we've carried out quite a range of impact assessments on the various aspects of the document already. We will assess the need for further impact assessments depending on whether, I suppose, proposals come forward that are more specific and where we need to refine them. Gareth, do you want to add anything about your side of it?
There were specific impact assessments on Theme D, which is possibly reflective of more of a catch-up agenda with developments that happened in Britain over the last number of years where we were without an executive. So we were in a position to, because we were consulting on firmer proposals, to go through the process with things like regulatory impact assessments and Section 75 screenings all taken place. And once the policy proposals have been developed and agreed with the Minister, they'll be reviewed and possibly updated as it's required. If there's significant difference between what was proposed in the consultation and what is ultimately proposed by the Minister.
So there is the potential for us to get individual impact assessments for every individual area if that is needed.
I'm speaking to Theme D, and they're available and they're published.
Yeah. What about the other themes?
So there are other impact assessments available, and I think we published about 19 impact assessments, now looking at equality issues and regulatory and cost impacts. We will continue to look at doing those for other areas as policy proposals become more developed, and we're happy to. Those will be published and shared with the committee.
How concerned were you with regards to the individual responses of some of our sectors? So, for example, FSBs, I'm naming for one, for it's going to be up before the committee later. But in relation to, obviously, given the Northern Ireland economy is largely dominated by smaller enterprises, and their particular concerns regarding so many aspects of this, with our economy and the state of flux that it's in, there's already been huge change for many businesses to grapple with. And here is the potential for government to add additional bureaucratic practices to those businesses, making them further uncompetitive. Is that a cause for concern for officials?
I suppose I go back to the point that many employers already go well beyond what is in the statutory employment law framework. It is about setting minimum standards. Many employers, particularly small businesses, actually, from some of the feedback we get, although they're not all the same, but many small businesses, do offer generous terms and conditions to their employees. You mentioned about sort of international comparisons of the framework of employment rights, and the Resolution Foundation carried out some analysis and published it in the sort of early autumn, where they made a comparison of really they were looking at GB in comparison with other jurisdictions in Europe and around the world, and what that showed was that actually GB was towards the lower end in terms of protection of employment rights, and that most European countries had a higher level of employment rights. The US was the area that very clearly had a lower level of employment rights than the UK. But the main sort of issue actually that was influencing where the GB was on that sort of matrix was the length of the qualifying period for unfair dismissal, which in GB currently is 2 years, whereas in Northern Ireland it's 1 year. So actually, just by virtue of that one difference in employment legislation between GB and Northern Ireland is actually, much closer to the middle of the table in terms of employment law, employment rights than Britain
I think it's
is.
important that you set out in context, obviously, the Resolute findings on that. We look at Europe, and certainly many people now look at it in its practice as much more bureaucratic than those of the successful economies around the world that are generating employment, generating good jobs, and therefore better standards of living. I suppose probably on this, David made another point that I think is of interest, and particularly the large numbers in the public sector. Do you not believe that there could be a potential chilling effect on some within the public sector to respond because it is a piece of executive legislation?
Well, I mean, arm's length bodies are free to respond to consultation exercises and often do. Certainly in terms of the executive, there's a full opportunity for ministers within the executive to respond in terms of issues that may impact on their departments. But I do think it probably reflects that public sector employers tend to be already doing a lot of the things that we're proposing to introduce for the economy more widely.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Kate that said about it, it's harder to get an accurate picture of individual employees. And I suppose probably that goes to the heart of my point, that there will be those within the public sector, individual employees, that may feel a chilling effect of speaking what they truly feel on this issue for fear of retribution. I'm not saying that will happen, but there always is that self-conscious view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable point to make.
Yeah. Okay, the last point from me is just a general comment. Look, we have a long road to go on this. There's going to have to be considerable engagement with the committee, given the vast areas that it is covering. I think, as was mentioned earlier, my fear, unintended consequences, that a good job employment rights bill could potentially mean fewer jobs and less employment bill. And that's something that I think we need to be guarded against. There will be aspects of this bill that we will all find agreement with. But certainly there's other aspects that cause for greater concern, which will require greater scrutiny. So thank you very much.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. And thank you all to colleagues. Just one final question from me, just in relation to the catching up, Gareth, that you'd mentioned in relation to with GB. So GB obviously then put the backstop of 2 years in relation to historical claims for holiday pay. I didn't see that in this consultation or proposals from the Minister. Do you expect that to come forward from the Minister in this bill?
Well, Kelly, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, you're right. It wasn't done in the consultation. We didn't consult on it, but we are aware through our ongoing engagement that it has been brought up with us and Minister, and it's also in some of the consultation responses. So it's something that will form part of the whole package when we discuss with Minister what he's going to do with regard to response to this.
And then, actually, this is finally, the proposal from the Department in relation to notification of strike action. The proposal in the consultation was lowering the notification period from 7 to 5 days. What's the Department's rationale for that? It goes to the point that others raised in relation to the public sector, for example. So you think of our hospitals, or you think of TransLink, for example. Do you think that a 5-day notice period would give enough for our hospitals or for our TransLink or other key public sector organisations to have cover in place to ensure that the public right across Northern Ireland would have the services that they need?
Well, I suppose the proposal was included in the document, I suppose, in response to the Minister's initial steer in his February statement that he wanted to strengthen the role of trade unions. I think that measure to reduce the notice period from 7 to 5 days was included in a private members bill in the last mandate. And so it was included in the consultation document to test opinion. We've got opinion back.
What is the opinion back?
Well, I think the opinion has been largely along the lines that you just set out. The Minister will be considering that when he takes decisions.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues. I know you were here for longer than maybe we had anticipated, but do really appreciate it. Obviously, from my perspective, and I assume from the committee's perspective, this is useful to have this sort of interim update by I know there was a piece in our pack, the department were keen to get our views on this at this stage, but given that we actually haven't been given a full picture at this stage, I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to get the committee to give a view of this. I think there's a long road still to travel, and I wish you all the best with the work. We look forward to working with you on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just some of the actions.
Okay.
Good thinking.
Okay, colleagues, I appreciate your input to that. And we'll just sum up some actions that the committee may wish to take as a result. Peter?
So, Chairperson, is the committee content to write to the department seeking a further update on the related proposals, including the list of ministerial proposals and a breakdown of that which will be primary, that will be in secondary legislation, and that which is expected to be covered by guidance? Additionally then, does the committee wish to suggest that the department makes further effort to undertake engagement, particularly with, for example, local economic partnerships, Ulster Farmers Union and agricultural interests, in order to ensure there's an appropriate understanding of the measures that are under consideration? Additionally, is the committee content to write the department to seek further information on the responses, including the percentages of who was against and who was in favour, and about a further breakdown of those who did respond: individuals, hospitality industry, SME, carers, ALBs. Additionally, does the committee also wish to seek an update on the EPC research on paid leave for carers, as they're having a meeting today about it, and to also seek the terms of reference of the Labour Relations Agency Engagement Forum, which is about to be decided. So, is members content with that? Sorry.
Anybody? Kate?
Yeah, just one thing. I would be interested to know what the department considers has been consulted and what they consider a call for evidence was. So within that document, what they feel they have actually consulted on and what they feel was simply a call for evidence. And they also agreed, I think they agreed that they would share horizon scanning with us. Is that something that the department would do, or that as a committee we would do? Because I think it would be really interesting just to keep an eye with this Westminster bill coming forward.
So is committee content to seek that? Horizon scanning, Westminster and Republic of
South,
Ireland?
yeah.
See, I asked about the HMRC stuff. Can we ask for what they responded back?
You can ask, Chairperson.
Yes, you can certainly ask.
Yeah. Can we ask for
Yes, yeah.
I put in a question actually, Chair, about that, about what engagement had been had with HMRC, and they said that they had been engaging. So
The member means HMRC and the Department for Business, Industry and Trade.
yeah.
See where they are with that too.
Sure.
And,
Jonathan?
Yeah, could we also just make sure that we get a list, an easy format list? I think what Kate has said is actually good to try to understand where the department feel that they have adequately covered these points. But on the impact assessments, I think it would be useful for us to have a full breakdown and list of where we have impact assessments and what is outstanding, so that the committee can see whether or not there's a read across.
Chairperson, just on that, I should have made this clear. Page 243, I've included the SAMBIT. Okay, so SAMBIT is code for small and micro business impact assessment, but I've also just emailed you a link to the other impact assessments. So are we content, because they have provided them, whether you find them adequate or not, that doesn't matter for members to decide, but there was a lot of them. I didn't want to put them all in the pack because there are about 17 of them. If members are content with that, Chair?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, members.
Chair.
Sorry, Sinead.
Chair, just come in there. I kind of lost the sound for a few minutes. But is the proposal to ask the department, is that their intention to come back and consult with the wider business organisations and it's all worker groups as well in the individual proposals, because we had a set of all proposals but nothing defined, and the responses from the department were continuing. Well, the minister will decide, but we can't actually do any scrutiny until the minister does decide. So and the business organisations and those that we're consulted with are in the same place. Just nobody knows really where this is going to land.
So, Chair, is the committee then calling on the department to further consult and explain with all of the relevant parties in these matters? Also, Chair, sorry, I forgot to pick up Sinead's point, which is about writing to the department seeking the NISRA data on good jobs and the gender pay gap. So it's if you look at that good jobs fact sheet, it doesn't refer to the whole of the Carnegie framework. It's just based on a couple of them. So and what official said was that NISRA are doing some work on this, so we could write for an update on that, on seeking that NISRA data on the extent to which jobs in Northern Ireland meet the Carnegie framework good jobs definition. Chairperson.
I suppose it really feels like the consultation is like a preliminary consultation, and we need to move into the deeper consultation once proposals have been landed on.
Yeah.
I noticed that too, actually, Chair, about how it wasn't, the fact sheet was only 3 of the 4 that they referenced. TEO, I don't know, other members are aware, TEO have the wellbeing dashboard, and there's data that's being collected by TEO. I don't know, maybe we go with NISRA first, but they may have some information.
I think it comes from NISRA, so you can find that on that's part of the PFG. There's wellbeing measures. If you go into it, there's one about trust in the Assembly, which seems interesting that the executive has that as a measure, but they do. But it comes from NISRA data. So
okay, so we're going to NISRA anyway.
Sorry, I think Mr. Middleton.
Thanks, Chair. Just back to the consultation piece. To me, looking at this, it seems that we're out of sync in terms of, so we have a situation where obviously this consultation was out, almost like a call for evidence. The Minister has indicated, they've indicated that he is going to bring forward his proposals of policy decision springtime. In the meantime, obviously it has to get executive approval. Surely, if they do not consult further as a department on their proposals, which they haven't indicated what they're going to do, then there will be a significant burden on this committee in terms of obviously the evidence that we will seek and scrutiny. But I think it is important that the onus is on the department to make sure that when they bring forward the proposals, that they are taking on board the views then of the various sectors, as opposed to because I think the time frame is going to be very, very tight. Springtime, they've allowed us 3 months, which isn't a long period of time, taking out all of the recesses and bits and pieces that go on in between that, to have it in front of the Assembly in January. Huge piece of work.
So I just make the point, and it's not for me to forego what the committee decide, but the department or the minister do not decide how long the committee stage of this bill is. This committee has sole responsibility. We may decide 3 days, 3 months, 3 years. That is a decision that this committee that lasts in this committee. So that'll be a decision that we as a committee will take together in the best interest of providing the best pieces of legislation. So outside commentators, the departments and others may have a view of how they wish this committee to act, but I know that each member of this committee discharges their duty that are subject to provide to the Assembly and to those that we represent, and will not be pressurised or guidance into taking a decision. It will be for us to take a decision. Okay. Just in relation to the Sambit stuff, Peter, yes, thank you for sending those through, but there are none provided by the department on theme C, voice and representation. So I just think that's worth flagging to the department that if they're going to provide impact assessments, theme C, there's been 0 provided to the committee so far.
That's agreed, Chair, to respond in that manner.
Yep, agreed. Okay. If members are content, I'm going to take a 5-minute comfort break so I can use the bathroom, and then we'll restart with the Northern Ireland Chamber, and we'll just take a short adjournment.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, sound.
Restarting.
Okay, colleagues, thank you. We now move to item 7, which is a evidence session with the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce on the Good Jobs Employment Rights Bill consultation. Gentlemen, you're very welcome, and thank you for your patience, and I'll hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for your invitation to be here today. I think by way of introduction, I'm Stuart Anderson, Director of Public Affairs at the Northern Ireland Chamber. We represent over 1,000 businesses in Northern Ireland, right across the region, from every sector, and indeed right across every county. I'm joined today by Mark Huddleston, who's the chair of our Workforce Committee. We brought Mark in the summer of last year once this bill was announced to support our work. Mark, as many of you will know, and I'll let him introduce himself, is an experienced individual in the area of people and skills, but is also a former manufacturer and employer, so has a real understanding on the ground of employment rights and how to work well within the existing framework. you have all seen our response, and very happy for the sake of time to talk to that in a high-level way in our introductory remarks. But I think if you got an email from me late last night, and I trust you all did, it was around the publication of our quarterly economic survey for Q4 of last year. I think that sets a really important context. We as an organisation don't like to sensationalise, we don't like to work off anything other than an evidence base, and this quarterly economic survey we've been doing for decades now, and really it is really useful in detecting trends in the marketplace. What we've seen, which is probably of more concerning to me than it has ever been since I've taken up the job within the past 3 years, is the dip in business confidence throughout 2024 and into 2025. We saw that in Q3 before the autumn budget, but what is really clear is that the Chancellor's budget has had a profound impact on business sentiment. I think you can go through that in detail, and we can talk to that at another time, but I think two things that I would want to draw out in relation to that are: one, when you look at the views of the respondents in relation to their prospects for their business for 2025, 29%, more than 1 in 4, are telling us that they are expecting their business to contract in 2025. That should be an alarm bell to all of us to work together to urgently try to address the issues that are there. The second issue I'd want to raise is the cost of employment in particular, but in the broader basket of rising costs, means that businesses now, 9 in 10 of the respondents are saying that they'll be under pressure to raise prices as a result, in particular of employee NICs, but also rises in the national living wage in the context of low, if any, growth. I think whenever we want to look at the Employment Rights Bill in particular, I probably want to just maybe highlight 3 baskets of issues, and we can talk to them at length. I think it's useful to have this conversation. It's useful to have the conversation because it's one that we haven't had, I believe, for over 10 years, and there's some positive things within the bill. We would have some concerns over the prioritisation of this bill when we haven't really got a clear outlook as to where we're going as an economy over the next 10 to 15 years. So the question is, what are we building good jobs for? Do we know what economy we're building good jobs for? And do we know what sectors we're interested in investing in? And I'm not sure that we can answer that question at this moment in time. But in terms of specifics, when we look at it and what's good, there's some really good things in there around removing the administrative burden. I think particularly in terms of the holiday reference pay, we have a number of organisations within our membership who operate across the UK and Ireland and operate in Northern Ireland and have to have separate administrative structures for dealing with holiday reference pay against those that they apply in GB, and they were very keen to see that progressed. We're also quite happy to see that the consultation is pitched as a menu of options. I think the question that was raised in the previous session around understanding what is actually moving forward as guidance, what is moving forward as statutory codes of practice and legislation is a really important one to ask. I know, and you'll appreciate, whenever we try to push for legislative amendment, it's really as a last resort. And I know whenever we talk to other departments and push for legislative amendments and things like planning, we get a lot of pushback. And I think that there's real value in understanding what that is all about. Because if we legislate for things, as has been mentioned here on many occasions, the unintended consequences could actually be counterproductive to what the stated intentions are. I think to move to the concerns, it's already been flagged here on a number of occasions, it's the scale of the bill. And reference was made to the analogous bill that's moving through in Westminster. Speaking to colleagues in the British Chamber of Commerce, which is a separate organisation from ourselves, but we are a member, they had flagged to us that the bill that was moving through Westminster was subject to 100 amendments from government ministers alone. That's just an indication of, if we are moving with this, we are at real risk of unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences fall almost wholly and exclusively upon those that we represent today. So we've got to think very clearly about that. What we have been disappointed with is the pushback on both timescales for consultation, but also pushback on prioritisation of why don't we break this bill up? Why don't we look at the issues that are of most concern and deal with them on a case-by-case basis? To touch on the point of consultation as well, I am increasingly concerned about diminishing returns and diminishing value in consultation responses. I was contacted by members about 5 separate consultations of substance that are happening in GB in Northern Ireland, and we've upcoming consultations and things like ISNI and also the programme for government that's moving through. So I think we've got to be very cognizant of not only the pressure on business, but the representative organisations like ourselves. I've got a team of 3 working across a significant numbers of consultations. So just please be mindful of that. We're also concerned about references to 0 hours contracts. I think we need to be very clear on the nuance in that. There are members of ours, first of all, it impacts on such a small proportion of our economy, and even relative to rest of GB, it impacts on a relatively small number of our members. But those who do use them because they work for both employees and the employer alike. An outright ban, as you indicated, has been clearly been pushed back on by the likes of Visit Belfast and others that are central to the competitive proposition that we put forward as Northern Ireland as a place to visit and invest. I'm also a little bit concerned about the ability of the system to cope with the changes. One thing that wasn't touched on was both the funding of the LRA, but also the backlog within the industrial tribunal system that we have. Access to justice is really important, not just for employees, but for employers. So we need to understand where we currently are with that system. And if we are introducing a significant body of rights, then the question is the system able to cope with that? Also, I think in terms of the question of employee voice, as a business organisation, the research that we look to is very clear. Employees that are engaged are the most productive. The Harbour Business Review is very clear on that, and it's something that our members are very, very keen to be engaged with. Whether that's small or large employers, a lot of that is direct employee engagement. There is almost nothing at all within this consultation about supporting employers to engage with their business. And so there is an assumption that the only employee voice that is possible in the current business structures that we have are through the trade union movement. And I think it's important to draw a distinction between relationships between employer and employee and employers and the trade union movement as well. Just finally then, and there's a number of other issues which you touched upon, which I'm happy to come back on. We actually see this as a bit of a missed opportunity in the broader concept of good jobs. We agree with the Minister's proposition that quality of work is more important than the creation of jobs, but that is already being dictated to by the market conditions. We have a tight labour market. We have had a tight labour market for many years. We have full employment. If anyone is looking for a job, the availability within the market to move around is very clear, and if you look at our economic survey, the recruitment challenges that each of our employers experience are at the front and centre of their concerns. But whenever you look at the reference point that the Minister has used to define good jobs, there are clearly key missing elements to that. When we approach our own members about what they consider to be the most important aspects of good jobs, it's career advice, it's skills, it's childcare, and what this consultation isn't touching on any of those issues. And the question I think that needs to be asked is, this is an employment rights bill fundamentally. To what extent does it shift the dial on the question of good jobs? And I think I'll leave it there, and if Mark has anything further to add, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Stuart. I suppose just dialing into the manufacturing element in particular, and I know some of the members had brought up maybe how sectors are looking at the moment. The Make UK PwC survey came out this week for manufacturing in the UK, and a couple of the headlines: 92% expect employment costs to rise. Well, that's unsurprising given the recent budget. Another challenge that in terms of cost of living, and it continuing to be, as Stuart alluded, an attractive employer. I think another interesting thing is that 51% of them also see energy and input costs still being a huge challenge. So when we look at where industry is as a whole at the moment, it's in a challenging landscape. Never mind the emerging fiscal landscape that's coming forward in the UK at the moment. And I think another interesting piece was that 57% of employers felt that the UK government's industrial strategy will increase their plans for investment. We don't have a similar plan for Northern Ireland. And I think in conjunction with legislation of this nature, it would always be useful to see, and I appreciate the Minister has 4 very positive pillars and economic vision, but they're a vision, they are not underpinned with an industrial strategy to support that. And I think it would be very useful to business to see a comparative industrial strategy that covered all elements of business activity at the moment. As Stuart alluded to, this is potentially a missed opportunity. Our colleagues from the department mentioned repeatedly that this was minimum levels being instituted. We engaged with the Fair Work Convention in Scotland during our work around this, and they were very clear that legislation at best gets you 20% of the way on all of this, and they said the rest of this is about social partnership and building engagement, collaboration and trust between all parties, and we would wholly concur with that. We are concerned that only elements of the Carnegie framework are being addressed here. Recent work by the Work Foundation and the Enterprise Research Centre in the UK particularly honed in on modernising health and safety laws, occupational health. Those are also good and necessary parts of good work, and there is nothing in this legislation that says that the department or officials or the Minister are considering how they maybe address mandatory occupational health for larger employers, for example. There is concern around how it will address the other economic pillars. Will it actually support those? How will it enable the arm's length bodies of the department alone, never mind the wider public sector, which questions have been raised here this morning around Invest NI, the colleges, Intertrade Ireland, Tourism NI, all very critical parts of the department's delivery. How will they be supported, or how will that will enable them to deliver on their remit and support good jobs? And I suppose another final piece just before we conclude is legislation without any ability to enforce or support that legislation is deeply concerning. We haven't heard anything yet as to how the LRA, the industrial court or tribunals will be funded, or their operating procedures and mandates, already in a huge backlog and challenging situation, will actually be supported to enable delivery of this legislation and where necessary, enforcement.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Philip?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I wasn't expected to be called on just so quick. So obviously, I mean, this is, you probably heard the earlier conversation that we had with the department. So, I mean, we're at a very early part of the conversation. And, you'll have heard members of the committee asking in regard to details and firm proposals, and we're not obviously not at that stage yet. So there are lots of moving parts with regard to building a successful economy, and whatever bill comes before the Assembly, obviously, we have to get right in terms of improving protections for employees, but also protecting businesses. And I mean, I think it was Stuart talked about or asked a question about what type of economy we intend to build. I mean, the economy is evolving and it's changing. I mean, we at this committee, and I mentioned this earlier, have took presentations on 2 key aspects that are kind of holding our economy back. One's productivity levels, and others, how do we get the economically inactive back to work? So, I mean, I said earlier that I see parts of this bill addressing both of those issues. Surely it makes sense. The greater protections, the better the jobs that we have, that we're able to provide. We will be able to get people who are currently in activity back into work. We will also, I mean, as an elected representative, I'm engaging with sectors nearly on a weekly basis who are struggling to get people into particular sectors. So, I mean, I see this bill as potentially helping to address that issue. So, I mean, I just want to maybe ask a question in relation to that aspect, and then also, I mean, you have said, you have concerns about 0-hour contracts and even in terms of unionisation or greater protections for unionisation. So, I mean, if you have those particular concerns, maybe can I ask what businesses think or what you think could be enacted to protect workers better than this currently being the case?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for your question, and I think your first one, I'll take them as they come. And your first one is a really good one, around do we think that this moves the dial on things like productivity and those challenges around economic inactivity. I think if you look at the issue of 0 hours contracts, the consultation is very clear. That there is a disproportionate number of women in particular that are reliant upon 0 hours contracts. I would suggest that is a symptom of the problem rather than the problem itself, and that is that women are finding themselves locked out of the employment market because of an inability to properly deal with things like childcare, and we are still significantly lagging behind the rest of the UK and Ireland in that respect. So I think if we want to address economic inactivity challenges, the flexibility that is afforded by way of the existing arrangements, and look, just to be clear on some of the challenging practices and inappropriate and wrong practices around 0 hours contracts, we would want to be very clear that they need to be challenged and addressed. So things like exclusivity in contracts, we have had no issue with that within our membership, but if you take some of those employers within the hospitality sector who find themselves employing women who have caring responsibilities, who don't want to be tied down themselves and want the flexibility in work, the risk that this bill does, if it follows the conclusion of an outright ban, is that actually you could take more people out of work. And actually, if you don't address the issue appropriately, what you could find is you could have those who are currently enjoying the status of being an employee shifting to being self-employed under the current structures, because the employer can no longer deal with the cost, taking into account the employer's NICS issue and everything else. So I think we need to tread really carefully with the issue of drawing assumptions. I remain to be persuaded that this bill moves us forward in respect of productivity, and I think when I say that, I'm reflecting the view that's been expressed by our membership. In terms of trade union activity, there is a broad consensus within those that we have consulted with to date that they enjoy really good relationships, and Mark can speak to this, having experience of working directly with trade unions within his own business. However, what needs to be prioritised more than anything else is the direct relationship between businesses and their employees. As I stated in our opening remarks, that is where you grow the productivity, and that is where you improve the relationships before the fallback of introducing a third party, which arguably creates more challenge than if you have a small business with 3 to 5 employees, between 10, 15 employees, where there is clearly direct connection between managers and those who are not. The other question around the lowering the threshold for trade unions is that, yeah, I'm formerly a solicitor. I used to work for a corporate practice here in Belfast. I'm well aware of those who work in industrialised, unionised environments. The cost that it is to employers to do the right thing in respect of dealing with those is largely managed by those larger businesses who can call upon suitably qualified lawyers to help them. If you're introducing those to micro-size or small-size businesses, they are not going to be able to avail of that advice and unwittingly risk putting themselves at risk. So I think the focus needs to be on direct employee engagement, and then we can take it from there. Mark, over to you.
There is massive benefit from good trade union employer relationships, and where trade unions and employers work together in the workplace for the employees or the union members collectively. I would look at my own experience of that around COVID and working with Unite the Union in a business in the northwest of England, where we spent significant time together ensuring we shaped the support for the workforce pre-using furlough, during using furlough, and then the return to work, Philip. I'd also note that the benefit it had in terms of upskilling and reskilling the workforce,
and the Union Learn activity was of significant benefit. Union Learn doesn't get a mention in any of this legislation, neither does anything related to skills. And that gap in supporting the department's own policy around lifelong learning is a huge gap here that could be addressed and would support growth in this bill. Talking to Stuart's point there in terms of some of the challenges, and it goes to questions from other members earlier. If we take the ICE, the information and consultation threshold being reduced, where requests for information go from 10% to 2%, and also the number of workers being reduced to a smaller level, that means the micro SMEs could have a significant burden in additional information being presented with very little added value either to the employee or the employer per se. And certainly something that we considered during our consultation was the work of Matthew Taylor and the Good Work review that was done by the Theresa May administration back in circa 2017-18. And his note was that the best way to achieve better work is not national regulation but responsible corporate governance, good management and strong employee relations within the organisation. Now, I can say as an employer I've failed at that and been on the other end of a trade union dispute, and that was because we as a business failed to follow those. So there is an element here where ensuring union voice and union representation is right and proper, and will support that. But again, if we're going to achieve good work, what is the department also doing around promoting leadership and management capability within the employer sector? We're now over a decade without a leadership strategy from the department or its predecessor, Dale. And that's something, again, that's a gap. And while this is, there's a lot of this, as Stuart has said, we welcome, there's a huge swathe of other pieces that will support good jobs going forward. And it would be good to see a complete picture from the department, which is why I mentioned earlier that a wider industrial strategy or similar type document would be welcome.
Okay, thank you. So, obviously, it's clear from today that there has to be an awful lot more engagement with regard to that. Stuart talked about particularly females with regard to net zero, and he's absolutely right. We do need to progress other pieces of policy, childcare being one. And even carers, dealing with the issue of carers is another. So, I see this bill working in tandem with other executive priorities to try and improve, obviously, the economy, but also the impact of workers. So, no, I think it's for coming. There's a lot of stuff raised here. This is a big bill, and it's important that we get everybody's opinion and get this right as we move forward. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Kate?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Really good to see you both. And Stuart, you started with the point about the Labour Relations Agency. And actually I meant to ask the officials about that. You had said there's a need to manage some of the proposed changes. What does that look like? Is that more resources? Is it kind of wider remit, restructuring the organisation? What do you think that should entail?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. I think there's a raising of awareness, which is I think a key role that the LRA, along with organisations like ourselves, should assume some degree of responsibility for. But I do think there's a question over the capacity of the system as a whole, all of the constituent parts, so the role of the LRA and also the role of the Court and Tribunals Service to manage any growth within the employment rights space. I think just to touch on a point that was made earlier, Kate, around the number of responses that were made, we encouraged all of our members to respond if they felt that they were being impacted, and we did our best to encourage our members to respond to this consultation. We also asked for an extension to the consultation because, as you know, it took place throughout the summer period. I would be slightly uncomfortable with the assumption that 66 responses from the private sector is sufficient. I would be particularly concerned, and perhaps a simple exercise like writing out to 10 businesses within your own constituency selected at random to see whether they are aware, familiar with this bill. I would contest that most businesses are so caught up at the moment in ensuring that they are profitable and able to continue to operate that they simply don't have time for this. You look at even at the issue of Brexit, where we are continually trying to raise new obligations as and when they arise, and still there is a significant proportion of firms who, to my knowledge, are not sufficiently prepared for some of those changes. This is another area, and what we don't have is a roadmap. And I know colleagues in BCC were particularly keen to see that in relation to their own in relation to their own piece of legislation that's coming forward. But just to have a roadmap to say when this legislation is going to be brought forward and when each of the changes are proposed to be introduced, because it's not only changes in systems and processes, it's also changes in actual business operations because even taking the example of employers next, I was talking to an economist yesterday who had a conversation with a small practice. They are making the decision to undertake a redundancy program to reduce their headcount to account for the costs of employers' NICs. That's the scale of and they're just in order to retain their own profitability. So I think we need to understand that yes, there is a question about enforcement. Yes, there's a question of knowledge, awareness being raised, but the context of how the current economic climate that we're operating in is impacting upon businesses' ability to engage is probably more important than anything else.
That's it's a really powerfully made point and really useful, because the department had said, well, business organisations like yourselves are responding on behalf of thousands of members, but if you've actually asked your members to respond and we've only had 192 responses, that's something to take on board. How much of that then, lack of awareness, pressures of the economy, but also the fact that there isn't the detail really in the, I mean, are you going to respond to a consultation response if you don't actually know what that means for your business?
Yeah, and that was a big part of the conversation. We met 3 times over the course of the summer as a workforce committee. We surveyed our members, we had a conference. We invited Lisa Wilson, who's the independent advisor from the Nevin Institute, to the Minister on these issues on 2 occasions. We've engaged with the Minister as much as we can. But that is the big issue. What is it that we are actually responding to? And we talk about unintended consequences. That's unintended consequences without actually seeing what is being proposed. And I have some sympathy for the department trying to undertake impact assessments when there's no clarity on what it is that's actually being proposed. So I think there's a fair degree of work that needs to be done there for sure. I don't know if Mark has anything. No?
The point about the Westminster Bill having 100 amendments from ministers alone is quite shocking. In your consultation response, you talked about careers advice as key for your members. You mentioned it there as well. 40% saying it's essential to deliver good jobs. It's something that this committee has taken a keen interest in. Do you have any views on what that looks like, best practice in terms of careers advice? What employers would really like to see in schools beyond?
I think as Mark was former skills commissioner at one stage, I'll let him discuss it.
There's a huge opportunity here. There's a challenge to employers themselves, and touching on previous points by other members, we are a micro SME community primarily in Northern Ireland, so how do you get those small businesses to engage with schools? We have seen the diminishing returns of the partnerships between schools and colleges, where that doesn't sit in a formal setting at the moment, or certainly is not as active as it could be. And for the employee or the employers then to take time to engage with schools has proved challenging. Now there is pockets of good examples. Within my own sector of manufacturing, we have 3 clusters that have done a huge amount. The mega cluster in Mid-Ulster, which was initially supported by Mid-Ulster Council and Invest NI, and now is delivering a lot of that activity by itself, has shown the benefit of direct school engagement. And I think a lot of careers advice now is about the emerging opportunities rather than saying this is a particular career that you want to consider as an individual. There is the GEMX cluster in the northwest, and then the manufacturing task force in Mid and East Antrim. And if you look at the manufacturing task force, what does good careers advice look like there? They run the science summer scheme with Brian Cox, and they bring him over each summer so they do to run a series of events. We have the Northern Ireland Science Festival coming up. Those, I think, are what we see now as emerging good and best practice, along with wider labour market data. The skills barometer that was introduced in the Department for Employment and Learning and continues to exist, supported by UEPC, is a huge benefit and shows a lot of the forward view. Now, how that can be supported and widened, along with work that we used to do at the UK Commission for Employment and Skills around employer surveys to understand how far behind they are and where the gaps are. So the skills barometer tends to have a forward view. We also have a current gap, and if you put the two together, that creates a complete picture for young people to be able to make decisions. I think that the other challenge with careers advice now is it's about the whole of the workforce, because technology is moving so fast. The UK government have just presented their AI strategy. That's going to revolutionise many sectors. So careers advice also needs to step into, and this is where, going to Philip's question around where trade unions can add a lot of value. Trade unions and employers working together to reskill and upskill the workforce is careers advice for the current workforce. In manufacturing, our estimate is that over the next decade, anywhere between 80 and 100,000 people will need to be reskilled and upskilled within that one sector alone. Some of that will be careers advice to move into other sectors and take that knowledge elsewhere. Others will be about improving their skills within that. So how do you deliver that with, for example, further education colleges seeing further cutbacks and challenges when they should be the primary driver for that reskill and upskill? So there's a huge piece of work to be undertaken there, but careers advice for both those in work and outside the workplace is vitally important.
I feel like we could have a whole day's conversation, maybe pick up with you offline. Finally then, Chair, just to say thank you to the Chamber for the work that you're doing on childcare, and actually for reminding us in this committee that it is such a massive impact. Every single party leader said childcare was a policy priority, and it would be worth checking with the department who are part of the childcare task force just what work they're doing in relation to supporting this in light of Good Jobs Bill. So thank you for your work, and thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark and Stuart, for your presentation. It's been really interesting so far, and it's really good to hear a range of views. And actually, I suppose the importance of the bill has been underlined by everybody today, but it's actually really good to get that range of views on how we can make it better and make it work for everyone. Mark, I was particularly struck by your point just around, I suppose, the skilling up and the reskilling within the workforce. I think that's something that's pertinent and that can be taken away from today. I know there are a range of skill up programs that the departments have undertaken around productivity in particular, which I think have been really beneficial. But as you say, it's how do you get in when businesses are so busy as is? How do you make the time for that? How do you kind of get those programs embedded? So I think that was a really interesting point. To be honest, most of my questions have already been answered, so I don't really want to labour them. But I suppose my points were really cognizant of all the issues which you've already raised, but I suppose conscious as well of getting a regional balance to see, if that's the experience across the north in other areas as well. It might mirror that, there might be slight differences. But I think that in this bill, the department has a role, and I think seems to have been already and will be responsive to those suggestions, to hearing what you have to say, what other chambers have to say, and as Philip mentioned, how we can actually make this work for everybody, because it's about good jobs working for employers and for employees alike. So really keen to hear more from yourselves, more from other chambers, and particularly around the economically inactive and how they're engaged in this process and how it's accessible to them as well. So just a comment really from myself. As I say, most of my questions have been answered, so thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Patrick. David?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Stuart and Mark, coming in. Again, I said earlier, I broadly support this. The difficulty I have with the department, actually not the bill, is we're talking about building a successful economy and we're looking inward everything we're seeing is inward. We're not looking at growing jobs and actually creating more employment. We don't have a manufacturing strategy. We've nothing for green jobs, and that's the bit. We're not looking outward. And I kind of want to just touch on that, and then about does this help with productivity? Just you named it or talked earlier, but will this help productivity to actually start to grow our economy?
I'll begin just because I think the conversation around quality work is a really important one, and it's definitely the space that businesses are in. It costs you an awful lot more today, as we know, as a result of the autumn budget and for many other reasons, to employ someone. Even recruitment costs, you have 20% plus cost for a recruiter if you're trying to hire someone in a really challenging market. So it's important that you get someone into a job, they stay in the job, and you train them and you keep them for that purpose. I think it's really important that the department is asking those questions. But from my point made in the outset, I think the first question, an exam question that we need to answer is, what kind of economy is it that we're trying to build? And you look at the questions of the impact of things like our climate change targets, the role of digitalisation, data and AI. What does that mean for every job as we look forward? And what does that mean for concepts like lifelong learning? These are questions that I guess are not being addressed within the consultation. And I think the starting point has to be what we have been calling for. We have limited levers in Northern Ireland to address, and we appreciate that. And we appreciate the Minister and the Executive as a whole has limited tools to respond. We welcome so much of the progress that we've seen around getting a programme for government, around getting a budget. Stability in the region is very important when you've got so much instability around us. So I think that's an important point to say. But the missing piece here is a long-term economic strategy. So we've got ISNI coming out, which is going to look out to 2050. Why are we building infrastructure if we don't know what type of economy it is that we're trying to build? And I think if we had that, then you're looking at the question of good jobs in a very clear context. Yeah, we'll not get everything right, and yeah, it'll not be entirely clear. But I think as well, it would give business a bit of confidence. So if you're talking to some of our energy companies, they would say they're effectively infrastructure companies. So their investment cycle is 10, 12 years. So they don't know where we're going to be 10, 12 years from now. And I think Mark can maybe talk to the manufacturing end more, but I think as a broad principle, the point I would want to land today is we are really supportive of this concept of building quality work over mere job creation. However, we need to get a sense of a direction of travel that we can all get around and agree on.
Yeah, it's one element of what creates a good job and one element of what delivers for the entire economy and will support productivity. Innovation and investment are a huge part of that for the private sector. How will the private sector continue to innovate? We have lower levels of innovation here in Northern Ireland than the rest of the UK. There is argument that maybe that data is incorrect, and some officials from the department would say that we need to look at that data again. But we have a track record of having a difficulty to access finance in the same way as the rest of the UK. And I know Invest and I have brought forward some new packages of support there, which are to be welcomed. But if we take it particularly to this piece of work and the Carnegie Principles, the fact that job design and nature of work haven't been included in the legislation or the proposal raises a concern as to, will this really, as Stuart said, move the dial in terms of productivity? I threw this anecdote to Stuart recently and his colleagues at the Chamber, and it's going back a while, but in the financial crisis of 2008, the Department for Employment and Learning responded very quickly to industry's challenges around the nature of work and the potential risk to employment by bringing forward support for business improvement technique training. The Minister at the time was Sir Jampy, and he listened very quickly and recognised the impact that this could potentially have. As an employer, we used that, trained our entire workforce up to level 3 NVQ standard in business improvement techniques. The benefit of that was we retained the employment of everybody in the workforce. We had some temporary layoffs, which we had to do, but we retained the employment overall. We improved our productivity. And how did we do that? Employee voice was increased because employees now understood why they needed to raise and flag issues in the factory. and the overall benefit was a growth in productivity and value within the business that was able to be actually distributed both in terms of investment in new technology, but also seeing growth in wages in the years post COVID and our post the financial crisis. The big challenge for us was one of the mistakes we made was we stopped recruiting apprentices at that stage, and that had a massive impact on growth going forward. Will this have a positive impact on apprenticeship recruitment, particularly in SMEs who continue to struggle to do it? So it's that complete picture that Stuart alludes to there that we don't see. I think a big concern for many of us is access to labour at the moment, and we have a growing challenge around sickness within the workplace. The stats for the UK see us potentially as high as 2.8 million absent from the workplace across the UK at the moment. We know that that's a big issue in Germany at the moment, and they're now being challenged. Are their benefits and rights have went too far the other way? There is a balance always to be struck with these things. We are potentially slightly on the wrong side of that. It could be argued, but are we then? And is that about occupational health being mandated in the workplace and other support mechanisms being there for people within work? And another challenge then is particularly the fact that young men, 16 to 35 in particular, are disengaging from the workplace. Will this legislation start to turn the dial in that? And certainly we feel that it's a real missed opportunity there to bring young men across our community who have disengaged. And we're seeing now that in the UK, male economic inactivity is now potentially going to outstrip female economic inactivity, with, as Stuart and I have alluded to earlier, the wider burden that female employees face as carers, both in terms of challenges with the social care sector and then childcare as well.
Just picking on that disengagement bit, so the 1635 disengagement of men, what in the bill then what could be added or what could be changed or what could be put there to actually encourage that and to help or to address that specific issue?
I think there's three things. Okay. One, there is the department addressing the 14 to 19 strategy, which has long sat as a ongoing cycle of engagement, probably from the late 90s. And while there is proposal at the moment, Department of Education, and this is where it can't be a single department solving this problem. Within the legislation, I think the big piece is about the right to learn. The right to learn is not included here, and if there was a right to learn both for those outside the workplace and inside the workplace. World Economic Forum presented some data this week around what is driving businesses globally, and if we were looking for FDI here, the top three were funding for reskilling and upskilling, provision of reskilling and upskilling, and improvements in education systems. And I think it would be wrong not to say that we need to address all three of those in Northern Ireland still. Fantastic work being done by the Skills Council and others to flag that issue. And Kathleen as a chair and others are doing a lot of work around that. The department are certainly interested, but the fact that that doesn't sit anywhere within this bill is definitely a missed opportunity.
Thank you. I raised earlier, and a kind of the protection of the worker is fundamental, and this is it's this. We're looking inward and we're protect, but that self-employed bit, I would love to hear just. It came up and I was shocked actually at some of the responses back. But what is just to give us a view from? I just personally don't understand how this in practice would work.
Yeah.
So what is the view of the chamber there on that?
I don't disagree, and we spent some time even just yesterday talking about this at length. It's so intertwined with taxation that the view of HMRC, as was discussed earlier, is absolutely crucial, and I think we need to move in lockstep with whatever is happening in GB on that, or at least
of course. I would add Department of Work and Pensions to that as well.
Yeah.
There is potential knock-on impact to universal credit and other elements of that are very important to people. So if we're thinking of carers and reduced hours and formalising contracts and minimum hours, that can have a knock-on impact to a person on universal credit. Ashwin Kumar, the former chief economist at JRF, recently put a piece out for Aberdeen flagging that, and I'm happy to pass that piece on to the committee to flag that. Sorry, Stuart.
No, and thank you for that. I think it's a useful intervention. I think we're just concerned about, as was flagged, there's no formal proposal that has come forward to us to properly. I mean, we have the benefit of having a number of law firms within our membership who can help support with this, our response to this issue. But I guess the salient point is this is really complex. Don't get it wrong by not consulting properly with the relevant UK government departments and agencies. And I think we can come back to you once we have a concrete proposal from the department. The other thing I would say is there are certain sectors that rely heavily upon certain structures that where self-employed individuals are very paramount, particularly within construction. Mm-hmm. And I think those sectoral voices are really important in this conversation as well. But I think to my earlier point around 0 hours contracts, you are at risk if you respond to this, if the takeaway from this consultation is an outright ban of 0 hours contracts or an inappropriate response to it, you are pushing an awful lot of people potentially into that very insecure environment of being self-employed, because employers can no longer take the risk of having them on their books.
Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both. Obviously, it's been extensive in terms of our conversation, I'll say consultation, but our conversation with you. So the Minister outlined his broad economic vision. I think for all of us, it has always been about, you know, what that means in terms of a plan, what it means even in terms of some of the definitions that have been used. Reference was made by the department in terms of the Westminster government, the speed in which they were able to bring things forward. You've articulated the number of amendments that have been put forward. So bringing things forward quickly is not always a good idea. Actually, it can be seen as, well, you know, you're moving forward in some of your manifesto commitments, but in reality, it's the unintended consequences and the outworkings. As a chamber, would you be calling for a further formal consultation based on the Minister's priorities, based on the Minister's view as to what they're going to recommend? Would you be calling for the further formal consultation, or would it be on the basis that you're content with just ongoing engagement, as was referred to by the department?
Yeah, I mean, first to say we welcome the engagement that we've had both individually with the Minister and more broadly with the department, and the fact that the Minister himself has been on record as saying the closing of the consultation was not an end of the consultation process. I think that was an important point that he made. But to the wider discussion here around the fact that we don't actually know in many cases what it is that we're being consulted on, other than a potential range of options, or even in some cases there is not a range of options, there is a question of opinion. So things like the right to disconnect, there is nothing formally coming forward there other than the question of opinion, and with best intention, and look, that could lead again to significant unintended consequences. So we would welcome further proper formal consultation, but I say that with a significant caveat of be very careful of the diminishing returns that you're currently getting because of the scale that we are currently dealing with in terms of consultation processes.
I take your point, and obviously it has already been highlighted. You know, there's timescales that the Minister has, but obviously as a committee we're not bound by what they say. Obviously we have our own timescales and our own consideration, and listening to yourselves, I think it is quite clear that there's a huge piece of work to be done, not least in relation to the other priority areas that you've talked about that we've already been dealing with in the committee around careers advice and skills and childcare, and those very important issues which can't be done in isolation. But I suppose a final point, because I'm conscious that a lot of things have already been asked, in terms of the missed opportunities. I think it was mentioned around the skills piece. When you say missed opportunities, are there further things that you think could be added to the bill? And I appreciate we're talking about the scale of it, so yeah. But are there things that you believe that could be added to it that could be dealt with in a more efficient way, rather than, as I say, some of the more difficult issues where there's maybe a lack of data?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I'll let Mark come in on the skills piece, but particularly, and there was a discussion on it actually around its omission from the consultation, and that was on the area of holiday pay and the backstop. again, having had some conversations with lawyers who are engaged in mergers and acquisitions processes, I asked the question, does holiday pay come up in negotiations of share purchase agreements? And they said it still very much features because there's still so much uncertainty around that area relative to GB. Again, all coming back to that question of competitiveness. There is a certainty there that workers will get compensated, but there is at least the protection for the employers against the windfall in GB. It's not clear why that has never been moved forward by the department, and it's not clear why it wasn't consulted on in this case. And certainly when we have raised it with the department privately, we haven't received positive responses around bringing it forward, but it is something that I think is worth exploring, because it's certainly something that, certainly from an advisory capacity, I'm getting a strong view that it would be very welcome. I don't know if Mark has anything else.
I think one of the challenges we have, again, goes back to the scope of the bill and the sheer breadth of it. One of the things that certainly came up from the committee was, is there the opportunity to phase this? We know there's elements of this that are directly linked to bring this in line with the rest of the UK as the only element of the UK with devolved responsibility for employment rights. And for a lot of the larger employers, that was something that they were keen to see, and it would simplify their activity. We then have the emerging legislation of the current government at Westminster, and there's an opportunity to again build on that as a potential next phase. And as Stuart noted, there's a lot of legwork still to happen around that, with significant amendment potentially coming forward there. And then there's elements where we go beyond all of that, some of it aligning ourselves with the rest of the island, some of it going beyond that again based on various inputs from different organisations, and it's whether we decide to do that as a complete single entity, or we maybe take a more pragmatic view that there is steps to take here. I think something that was noted there again was, we would like to understand where there is going to be advisory information presented, or there's going to be secondary legislation presented. What is it that is likely to come forward in that area, and is there certain principles that are guiding and directing all this? Matthew Taylor talked about a fair balance of rights and responsibilities, that everyone should have a baseline of protection. I think it's very hard to find anybody that would disagree with that. But as presented at the moment, the legislation or the consultation certainly left a lot of gaps as to where it gave a lot of examples of other best practice. But we'd want to see more there in terms of that. In terms of where there's missed opportunity, I think we go back to the fact that it only addresses 4 of the 7 Carnegie principles. Has the department got a plan to address the other 3? Would be a key question we have, and we take. I don't think anybody. There's different views. Some other types similar to the Carnegie principles. If we all accept the Carnegie principles, then where are we in addressing all of those would be a key question here, and that goes back then to a wider framework that for the whole of the economy alongside that.
Thank you very much.
Sinead?
Thank you, and thanks to Stuart and Mark for the detail of the considerations that they have already given to date, and the breadth of their engagement with their membership in and around all of this. And I think we're all very, very clear of the complexity of the bill and the breadth of it. And I suppose we'd be in danger in thinking, if anybody's looking into this, that we're not supporting good jobs. We absolutely are supporting good jobs and quality jobs and good employers into the bargain. But it's just we need to get this right. And I do know that businesses are currently operating in an extremely challenging environment. The cost of doing business has risen quite significantly in the past couple of years, and indeed the budget has put further strain on those businesses. So it's important that we don't do anything that will put extra pressure or extra compliance burdens on businesses that actually depletes their viability, and we would be in danger of doing damage to our economy. So it's important that we do get it right. Look, from what you have been saying, Stuart, I think, you talked about a sweeping set of new proposals that could have been arrived at in relation to skills and other issues that were pertinent to good jobs. Do you think that the Minister should have had detailed more engagement with you and other organisations and sectoral groups at the start, in order to avoid this kind of I would say this appearance of hindsight to the overall approach, and not just look at workers' rights, but look at a whole set of issues, even including all of those vision statements that have been made from the outset, and how that they can be kind of embedded into maybe other industrial strategies that would actually help really promote good jobs and quality jobs. Do you think that the cart has gone before the horse in a way?
Look, thank you for your question and reflections, Sinead. I think we enjoyed a lot of engagement with the Minister early on. I think he was about a week into the job whenever we first met him, and had lengthy discussions prior to him taking up the role. I think more broadly there is an issue, and we flagged it in our response to the programme for government, around the notion of business partnership. We are very fortunate as an organisation to have so many businesses willing to step up and to answer some of the questions that the executive are trying to solve. But when you look at other jurisdictions, and looking particularly at places like Scotland, where they've got things fundamentally wrong because they didn't engage business early enough in the process, they responded to that by looking at a new deal with business and a new partnership model with business, and that involved a very careful analysis of policy development within every single department of government in Scotland on areas of policy that impacted on business, and then raised the question as to engaging with businesses at an appropriate stage. And I think that's a learning that we need to take, not just with this process, but I think more broadly across the executive as a whole. I think we are where we are, and we welcome that the Minister continues to want to engage with us. We are meeting him tomorrow through the vehicle of the LRA. I think there are still opportunities to address these questions that we have asked. And I think, I guess I'm often asked the question, do I think that ministers listen to us? I think we're certainly engaged a lot, and certainly whenever you look at things like the Finance Minister's response to the autumn budget and the retention of the creep up and the uplift of non-domestic rates took account of the impact of the autumn budget. But I think if we're going to ask the question, are businesses listened to? I think you look at the response that we put forward to the consultation, you look at responses from FSB and others, and we'll see how they are reflected in what is the final bill whenever it moves forward. And I think that's when, I guess, you can make that judgment.
You have suggested as well that legislation should or could be a tool used to focus on where practices are below standard or exploitative, and the ability to give employees choices. How would you see that? Would you look at that, as Mark had suggested, as in a phased approach as well? Maybe if the breadth and the depth of this bill becomes so cumbersome that it holds everything back. Yeah. What areas of the bill do you think should be progressed at pace to get things through?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and one I think I would come back to you on. I think I would like to understand what the department's intentions are around what areas they would see as, I guess, priorities, and those that they would like to move forward with as quickly as possible. I think if you're a business dealing with this, I think you make a good point around preparation. If you are, as most of our businesses are, smaller micro-sized businesses, your accounts manager, your business development manager, your CEO, and HR lead are all the same person. and therefore we've got to be very, very careful in allowing them the time to be compliant, because what we've got to understand here, sometimes the narrative here is a little bit challenging and sometimes a little bit challenging for business to hear. Most of our businesses, in fact the overwhelming majority of our businesses, want to do the right thing, and I think the department has got to facilitate their ability to meet their obligations. So what we would be calling for, Sinead, is a roadmap, or at least a draft roadmap that we can engage with, and then take it to our members to decide which of these can you deal with first, and which of these can you resource properly first. But that's something we would need to engage with our membership on, as to which of those areas they would want to deal with first, and isn't a question that we've posed to date.
Stuart, in your actual response as well, you've said a holistic workable framework. Is that your roadmap?
Correct.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's grand. Yeah, I think that there's a lot more work to do. I suppose it's government's role to kind of make the business environment conducive to doing business and growing the economy. And I just, at the minute, this bill is very, very cumbersome. There has to be some kind of way that we can move through it without holding good pieces of legislation back in any shape, form or fashion. Okay.
Thanks, Sinead. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stuart, for the presentation. I suppose probably in brief, I for one think that this bill has unintended consequences written all over it. It's certainly a grave concern to me, particularly with where the economy is at present. And I suppose probably I don't think there's been enough focus on the huge increases in costs associated with businesses following the budget, and particularly national insurance contributions. How difficult an environment do you see that if a bill like this was to go forward, the added increase that it would cost? Because obviously businesses are pushing costs associated with doing businesses onto the consumer. It's their only way to survive, and therefore fueling the inflation aspect of the entire debate at present.
Yeah. I'll maybe come in on this first, Mark, and then I think actually we've got to be cognizant of the fact that we have at least the flexibility in the organisations that we represent and the businesses that we represent, that they have the ability in many cases to pass those costs on in order to cover their costs. But this bill is for employers in the widest possible sense, public sector, third sector, social enterprise, who will not have the ability to pass those costs on, and therefore you need to think about the consequences of that. There was an important discussion that took place before we were here around impact assessments. I think the cumulative burden of this bill is unclear because we have not had an impact assessment on the cumulative burden of what this bill will mean. So I think it's actually really difficult to answer your question, and also the time frame. You know, when this bill actually takes effect, what environment are we going to be working in? What will the world look like in 2 years' time or more? So there's a lot of open questions there, and certainly unintended consequences, taking into account what has happened in GB with their bill to date. I think is a really important point for us all to sit up and take notice of.
I think that there is the potential that this impacts certain sectors more than others, and I think the question was asked earlier by one of your colleagues, Jonathan, around the sectors, and did the department understand which sectors were going to be truly impacted. If we take some of the information that's coming from the British Retail Consortium around the challenges facing it, they're saying that based on the NICS increase, the national living wage increase, the employment legislation compliance and the packaging levies that are all coming forward across the UK, that would have a knock-on impact on food inflation of around 4.2%. Now that's really significant. You know, inflation came in today at 2.5% more broadly in the UK, but a rise of that amount again, and having, we can argue as to whether we're on the cusp of coming out of a cost of living crisis or an ongoing cost of living crisis, and I would say it's probably the latter rather than the former. Yeah. When you put all that together, that's what's going to appear on the shelves. That's what's going to impact our farmers, because Tesco are not going to take a cut in their own margin. They're going to look at the customer and they're going to look at the supplier, and that's where the big retailers are going to fight that. And then if we take our hospitality and retail sector, they're going to see a further squeeze, and an incoming government in Ireland that is proposing a VAT reduction within that sector in its programme for government.
I think it's been announced at 9% or something. So
yes.
The difference is staggering. I suppose probably earlier on in a previous session, one of the members suggested that there's a bill for productivity. Like, am I reading this wrong? I see this as productivity killer, particularly because whilst I understand that it is important to have the balance between employer and employee rights, that's crucial. But are we not also negating the fact that there is certain people that will attempt to use some of the mechanisms which this bill may provide to stymie productivity in the workplace, and therefore essentially hamstring some employers whenever it comes to whether it's recruitment or whether it's productivity or efficiencies? I certainly have concern about how some people, and I say it's some, I'm not saying all, certainly not, and I don't want to be misrepresented, but is there the ability for certain individuals to game the system if some of these proposals became reality?
Look, I think your question around productivity is one that this committee should be pushing all the time, both in the context of this bill, but also across the four pillars. And of course, one of them is productivity, but across the pillars of the minister's vision. Unless we know what economy we're trying to build, it is very difficult to understand how we actually move the dial and productivity. The UK government launched their AI plan on Monday. We know from the research that will have a significant impact on productivity, and the question is where is Northern Ireland when we're having a debate around that? I think we remain to be persuaded that what is within this bill will shift the dial in relation to productivity. But as has been discussed, I think the question the opening question about encouraging employee voice is a good one. But the starting point for that has to be direct engagement and encouraging, particularly small employers, how to engage properly and meaningfully with their employees, so that employees themselves can feel like they are a part of a business and part of a business that they are driving forward. That's how you get those productivity gains in the first instance. And so that's a question that I think in this consultation was a missing piece.
So at this early stage, and I'll finish on this point because I know we're tight for time. At this early stage, is it your assessment that this bill potentially stifles productivity or creates productivity?
I don't think it's as black and white as that, John, and I'm not meaning to sit on the fence. Employee voice is really important part of productivity. Is this one element going to help drive productivity forward? There's a lack of detail to be able to say yes or no to that right now. That's why we say there's a missed opportunity here. There is a range of other elements that the department need to urgently consider around this. Employee voice is vital in that. I've experienced that as an employer, both with trade union representation and direct employee voice. But will that do it on its own when we're not addressing the cost of energy, when we're not supporting growth and innovation, we're not supporting and funding growth and skills, and the department are sitting with probably one of the most toughest budget outcomes of any of the departments in Northern Ireland? They want to actually drive economic growth and success here. And that impacts the public sector productivity as well as the private sector. Public sector, like the private sector, pay essentially a tax on employment in Northern Ireland through the apprenticeship levy, and that's not being addressed either.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and Diana.
Thank you, Chair. And it's been a really, really interesting morning, just discussing all of this. And a lot of questions have been covered that have come to mind for myself. But I think, Mark, that the last point, or Stuart, sorry, about productivity and employees' rights, and they need to be engaged within the institution or the workplace where they're working to get the best productivity. But I don't think we've heard enough about actually what are the employers' rights through all this. As an employer, if you're facing into headwinds with more and more regulation, and it's right that we have to protect workers in a fair and reasonable manner, but what is the piece about the employers' rights, really, that they have a right to representation, a right to tribunals? Is that a piece that's been mentioned?
It's certainly something that I think, again, is something that the legislation needs to look at. If we're going to increase employer voice, then we want to have, I've certainly always benefited from having full-time representatives from the trade union movement on the other side of the table who understood the sector and understood its priorities and requirements. And where you have that, that creates a really positive relationship between the employer and the employee. Where that is missing then can create challenge. And different unions will obviously have different views and responsibilities. I would look to health and safety legislation. Health and safety very clearly outlines the role of the employer and the role of the employee in ensuring a healthy and safe working environment. And I think that's something that the department, and it has responsibility for that, should look to those elements within its own department to address that and balance.
Sorry for cutting across you. It kind of touches on what Jonathan said. If you have, and you don't want to be in that situation where someone is coming in to stymie really productivity, where, you know, that's where that sits in that piece about employers' rights. And that is that relationship, yeah.
That's been the nature of employment from the get-go. You're always going to have that challenge. I think where you're sitting in the vacuum of no formal social partnership structures in Northern Ireland, if we look at what Scotland did, where it assumed that there was the potential to win the independence vote in 2016, or just before that, the Scottish Government created the Fair Work Convention. That was the creation of an organisation that was independent of government but created a social partnership there to have those dialogues and discussions with the view that there was the potential for devolution of employment rights. That would certainly go a long way, and having been a member of a social partnership across the UK between trade unions, the third sector and employers of all sizes, and my predecessor Bill McGuinness acting in that role, there was huge value at that time of having the TUC, the CBI, the major trade unions and the major employers, as well as devolved representation, all in the room together, engaging around the challenges and how we collectively work to address those.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, for that. And Stuart and Mark, that was very, very useful indeed. And I think it's important for both members and for public listening, you know, that the remarks that you make are representative of 1,000 businesses across Northern Ireland that represents 105,000 employees. So I trust that the remarks that you have made today will be taken seriously, both by committee members and by the department. No doubt we will be in touch with you in the coming months when this bill eventually makes its way to the drafting process, so we can see what's actually contained within it. But we really do appreciate your insights at this very stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please reach out to us at any time. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yes, summarise, Peter.
So, Chair, is the committee content to just write to the department and, in line with what Ms Nichols said, just ask for an update on the action it's taking in respect of enhancing childcare support in light of the measures that may be in the Good Jobs Bill? Additionally, just perhaps, do you want to write to the department, just ask for their views on the holiday pay backstop?
Yeah.
And also, further to, we already asked for information on universal credit. Just what the department understands the impact might be on universal credit of the banded hours proposal, so that they move away from 0 hours. So just to see what perhaps DWP has actually said to them that. Additionally, if members are happy, is the committee also content to write to the Chamber, thanking them obviously, seeking sight of the Kumar report, which is again links to this universal credit and other stuff. Further to that, there's been quite a few references to the GB legislation. So would the committee like to commission raise to Horizon Scan? So you've asked for the department's Horizon Scanning. We'll see what we get, but we could commission our own to see what's going on with the GB legislation, and indeed in the Republic of Ireland and Scotland, the Fair Work Convention, to see just how that might inform this legislation. And finally, there was reference there to leadership and management in SMEs. UUEPC have done work on this, so would the committee like to hear from them, because they've offered to come and brief on a few things, so we could ask them to come and brief on their reports that they produced on that subject.
Yeah.
So that's all I had, Chairperson. I think.
Sinead?
Chair, yeah. Would it be of value to write to the department and ask them, are they considering providing a workable framework that we could use as well as those in the business community?
So I think, Chairperson, the member's asking the Minister to set out what he's going to do in the bill. So does that cover what the member's asking for? Or is there something
I
else?
suppose, again, it's back to the timing of it all. You know, I'm afraid we're kind of going to run off the runway with all of this because it is so massive. So, you know, if we could see what the proposals are in a time frame and moving forward, and I'm wondering, has the department considered phasing any part of this bill and giving priority to any sections of it, because it would be quite interesting to see if that is under consideration, because even with the responses that they've received to date, they probably know that they're under extreme time pressure, so maybe they are considering a phasing stage of it.
Committee consent to seek clarity from the department on that. I think Mr. McGuigan.
Philip?
Yeah, thanks. Just, I mean, I'm not sure if it was being covered there, but in the clerk's paper, he made a suggestion about evidence from NIC 2. I mean, I think that would be very useful, just given some of the issues that we've covered today. I think that's a very important piece in the jigsaw. So I would request that we get a briefing from them.
No, I was going to come on to that, Philip, in terms of that and further evidence sessions, and I agree with you. My only slight concern is we're going to continue to get, if we continue to do evidence sessions, but we don't actually know what's in the bill. I would really like to hear, particularly the trade union views, whenever the proposals are on the table. Now, listen, seeing that we've heard from an employer perspective, I think it's important that we will invite the trade unions along on this occasion, but there's others that have been in contact about this, but I'm just wondering, is the committee's view? I think we should accept the trade union one, but I think it'd be important then just to wait till we see what it's actually proposed in the next steps, because we could be taking evidence on a whole session on things that either aren't going to be in the bill or completely new legislation or ideas that the Minister has picked up from a consultation response, and then we're going to have to start all over again because it'll be fresh information. So are members content that we invite along Nick too? But then we wait for further evidence sessions on this until we sort of get a guide from the department in terms of where they're going with their proposals. Are members content with that? Yep. Philip, you happy with that? Yep, perfect.
Fab. Thanks, members.
Okay, and then move on to item 8, members, which is correspondence, starting at page 295. Item 2 at page 297 is for noting in respect of 7 mineral prospecting licences. Are members content to note at this stage?
Agreed, members.
Yeah.
Great, okay. At item 3 at page 299, members are asked to note correspondence in relation to the EU General Product Safety Regulations. Are members content to note at this stage?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, members, is in relation to the annual reports of FE colleges. Belfast Met, North West, South Eastern, South and South Eastern. The colleges do not all provide enrolment and students data on the same format. And indeed, one of our colleges, the Northern Regional College annual report, is missing at this stage. So is the committee content to write to the department encouraging that as part of the ongoing review that the FE colleges all report this important information in a similar manner, so that it's easier then for members to be able to compare the figures? Are members content with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 5, members are asked, we've already done that, so
yes, we're happy enough then. That's just correspondence from Nick 2 asking him to come, and the committee's agreed, so content to note then.
Item 6, members are asked to note a consultation document from the CMA on their annual plan. Members content to note? Item 7, members are asked to note a copy of correspondence sent by the RHA to DFE. Are members content to note that one? Yeah. Item 8, members are asked to consider a copy of the final version of the Tourism Vision and Action Plan. This is in tabled items, members, which was sent out yesterday. Are we content to invite the Tourism Partnership Board to come and brief on this document? Yeah. Thank you. Then moving to item 9, forward work plan. Peter?
Members, I know you're tired and very good sessions, lots of questions. So briefly then, as you can see what's coming up, DKIT are coming on the Dundalk Institute of Technology, 12th of February. NIC 2 then would come on the 19th of February. The Northern Ireland Tourism Alliance on the 19th of February. And we have previously agreed UUEPC would come on regional balance at the end of March. So what I'm also, if you also look at some visits and things, we're trying to get the Maison Cash visit and meeting in March, on March the 12th. I'm trying to get the Development Corporation Board in that. other plan then would be that we go to Game of Thrones, Jonathan's away, go to the Game of Thrones and perhaps also have our meeting there, and then maybe have a visit to the Deluxe Group in Portadown, who do all these experiential interiors. So this is all about the creative industries. So we could do that in April, and then go to Studio Ulster, again about creative industries, but also take in Spirit Aerospace while we're there, because it's not far away, in May. Then the plan would be to try and get to Dungannon Energy Hub in early June, and then have our third visit to Foyle would be in mid-June. So that way we'd have a bit of visiting, get out and about a bit, but we do some creative art stuff. We'd get to some other parts of the of Northern Ireland, and that would sort of what I'm super conscious of, members, is the department's talking about that bill 2026. Haven't seen the bill, don't know how long the committee stage is going to take. Ask me to guess, 1 year. But that would be assuming there are no other bills, and I imagine there will be a stack of other bills. So that means wherever you want to go, whatever you want to do, let's do it in 2025, because you won't be able to do it in 2026. We'll be doing legislation. So there you go, Chairperson.
Just one other one to flag on board work plan was there was a meeting of the CLG yesterday, Chairperson's liaison group, and the Assembly seemed to have booked something at the Balmoral show and are keen that we have some sort of interaction with the committee at it. So
do you want they're warning us against meetings, but what they're saying is go by all means, and so is committee interested? Do you want to go to?
Just given the economic impact of whether members represent rural constituencies or not, it's a major part of our economic landscape at that part of the year. So I think it's important that we do support it.
Okay.
Not too many farmers in my constituency, but I'm just thinking to support it. Moving on to any other business members, does any member have any? I just wanted to raise one, if members are content, the night movers. So obviously took place in both Foyle and in Belfast over the festive period. Late night train, something that we had raised. Translink never furnished us with their business case for full extension, so I'm keen to try and get their view in terms of the success of that, support the nighttime economy over Christmas, and what work we can do to try and persuade the funding of the continuation of that service throughout the rest of the year.
Content to write the Translink in those terms. My understanding is that the business case in question is with DFI now. Yeah, very shortly. So we have been pushing them on it actually, but write the Translink all the same, if that's agreed, Chairperson.
Okay, if there's no other business members, we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much indeed for your
Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound.